Uh, you guys outdid yourself.
Have you seen any of that recently? Do you ever watch your old races, Broc?
No, I absolutely can't say I do, actually. It's funny, but I don't know that I've ever seen that footage. I believe it was from San Diego. And I think, if I saw that right, that motorcycle was a brand new YZ 250 production one. And we auctioned it off and gave it away to a lucky fan afterwards, because it was literally a stock motorcycle for the upcoming year model bike. And it was pretty
No way.
Win a Supercross on a box stock motorcycle that you literally gave away to somebody.
Huh. What, and you actually won the Supercross on it?
Yep.
Oh wow! God, that bike's out there somewhere, and somebody probably does not know the history of it.
No, he actually does. Yeah, I actually knew a gentleman. He was kind of a friend of Marty Tripes, and that he had that bike for many years afterwards. Actually,
no way.
Pretty cool. Believe it or not, there was a local San Diego area pizza chain of restaurants that we picked one of their locations. That was where the guy picked up the bike, and yeah, that was that bike. I think the same model bike, if not the same bike, was also, I won what was called the Trans-Cal series in a CMC series when we stopped going to the Trans USA series, and the following year in '82, I believe it was, that was the same model bike. So it was fun. I mean, competing against all the best works bikes, even the Hondas of those days, as you saw, with all those exotic Hondas, and be able to win
absolutely
hometown on a stock production bike.
When will I don't know, who is it who does the modern Supercross? Is it called Feld, the company? Or
yeah, Feld.
When will they put one of those loops up through the seating like they used to do, like you had in that race?
Yeah, it's the Feld ended up buying a company, and I can't even remember all the names of the different hands. But back in the days when I raced, if you remember, there were multiple different promoters, and the promoters were kind of a mixture of the Mickey Thompson, Mike Goodwin, and there was the group down here in Texas that C.E. Altman and the boys ran. So all those ended up combining and become what we know today as the Feld Entertainment Group and the Feld Motorsports Group.
But it'd be good to have a part of the track that goes up, like when you used to do, was it the Coliseum, when you used to go up and then was it called the Peristyle or something?
It was called the Peristyle, absolutely. And
somebody needs to do that again.
I agree. I loved it. And you saw that footage there at San Diego. It actually went up. It was kind of an interesting design of the track. It went up the left side of the stadium through the seats, and then we made a run right across in front of what was the big scoreboard, the open into the stadium. And they had a big set of whoop-de-doos up there along there, and then you turned back right, came down the stadium, and then they came to the finish line jump. So later on, as that stadium was expanded and they put some extra seats in there, it almost enclosed the whole end of the stadium, and it changed the design of it. Now, unfortunately, right now they're in the middle of demolishing that old stadium, and it's been imploded, and they're tearing it down right now. They're going to build a smaller college stadium there, and no longer the San Diego doesn't have a American football team anymore, and the Chargers moved to Los Angeles into that new stadium up there. That hopefully we'll have Supercross up there soon, because that's a beautiful new stadium in Los Angeles.
Absolutely.
Well, could you hear the noise of the people there? Because the atmosphere of that night just sounded. It just sounded, obviously, San Diego's, but I suppose it's your hometown. Although you're from a hotbed of motocross riders from El Cajon.
Yeah, we were only 10 or 15 miles east of the stadium there, so yeah, absolutely, it was a hometown crowd. But yeah, it's kind of hard to describe. I think probably the most. I raced in 1985 in the Anaheim Stadium, in the old configuration of that stadium, when it was a completely enclosed stadium and held over 70,000 plus people, and they sold it out, and I won that night. And you can absolutely feel the presence of 70,000 people, and when the spark happens in the crowd, you there's no question about it. And it's what we miss it's the riders are even talking about it now. I mean, it was in Houston. We had the limit was 10,000 fans, and the stadium holds about 70,000. So you can imagine how it, I guess, how hollow it feels. And I'm sure the riders, and I feel for Eli Tomac and these guys that won their championship last year at the Salt Lake City rounds when there was 0 fans in a small stadium that only held maybe 20, 25,000 people. So it was very odd, and I can't wait till this whole COVID thing is over. We can get back racing where the fans can be present.
But you said there's 10,000 spectators in the stadium where you are at the moment. Because I watched it on TV and it looks like there's next to nobody there.
Yeah, it is. And then we're also going to be racing in Arlington, which is the suburb where the Dallas Cowboys in Dallas, and that stadium holds nearly 100,000 people. And so if they allow 10,000, it's just going to be like such minimal amount of attendance. And really, they cut it off at 10,000 people here, and it seemed like there was only 2,000 people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Your motocross career started literally sitting on the fence, didn't it, Broc?
Yeah, it's I had, as a family, I mean, kind of, my father actually went to high school, and unfortunately the gentleman just passed away. And if you look back at a couple of issues ago in Cycle News, they did a nice tribute to a gentleman named Don Graves. And Don was really a pioneer in the motorcycling industry and worked for almost all the OE manufacturers. And he went to high school with my father up in Oregon. And Don moved to Southern California to go to college. And he went to work for a Honda motorcycle dealer, one of the very first Honda motorcycle dealers ever. And my dad and he were very close friends. And then later, Don went to Kawasaki, and he helped my dad get some dirt bikes for our family. And we started riding as a family, just recreationally. Luckily, where I lived, I could actually ride my motorcycle from our home, just maybe down a mile or two down the side of the road and go out into the big open areas and ride motorcycles. And then the Torsten Hallman distributorship started in, San Diego area. And then Edison Dye, the gentleman who brought motocross to America, and he had the Husqvarna distributor. He was in San Diego and actually lived in the next town over from where I grew up in El Cajon. So San Diego had a lot of motocross when I was very young. I'm talking 8, 9, 10 years old. And we would go and watch these races. And I actually went to the very first Super Bowl of motocross in 1972 and watched a neighbor of ours, Marty Tripes, win. And so I went to the very first U.S. Grand Prix at Carlsbad and watched the Americans and the Europeans, and went to some Trans-USA race, or what was that time Interam races at Saddleback. And there was even one where the late great Joel Robert won just outside of my hometown of El Cajon, that I got to watch him race at the Raceway. So I was exposed to motocross at a young age. And then my oldest brother, Mark, started racing motocross. And a couple of guys that worked for my dad rode motocross bikes. So I was around motocross a lot. I just didn't start racing until I snuck my very first race at 13. And then I started racing hardcore at 14 years old. So
you got into a bit of trouble, didn't you? Because you'd done it behind your mum's back or something.
Yeah, at the time it was kind of unfortunately, and it happens to families. My parents, when I was 13, they informed me that my parents were going to divorce. And it was a tough time because at that point, I was doing many things. I played American baseball and football, sports, many other sports, and motorcycle riding was a great hobby. Something we did again as a family. We would go to the Southern California desert areas and practice and camp out for a couple of days and ride our dirt bikes all day long out in the desert. And again, there was a lot of motocross and people who raced motocross in my area. And so unfortunately, when the parents went through a divorce, all that dried up, all the funds for it, all the different things. So I still had a couple of motorcycles that that were in the garage. My brother had a CZ 250. He left it behind, and pretty soon I'm 12, 13 years old riding a CZ 250 out in the hills around San Diego. And just the racing part didn't really happen until I showed up. We went to a race, and a gentleman that worked for my father, his son had a Yamaha MX 100. And I was there, and then they let the total squids, the novices, race in the afternoon after the good guys rode in the morning, and the track was destroyed. And my dad looked at me and said, "Hey, are you interested would you like to ride? Would you like to race?" And of course I said yes. And I borrowed some clothes and boots and helmets and went out and raced my first motocross race. And then it wasn't about, less than a week later, of course, Mom found out about it. I think she was more angry at my father, and she took it out on both of us, and that I should have known to say no. And it didn't. So it only took about 2 or 3 months of pestering my mother to no end that she finally caved in and allowed me to start racing on the up and up.
What I find really interesting is that yourself, Stefan Everts, Kirk Nicol, Jeremy McGrath, Joel Smets, they all started quite late, but went on to do really good things and, big things in the motocross world. Like, I think Joel Smets was 17, Stefan was 14 at his first race, a bit like yourself. You didn't sort of start at 5, 6 years old.
I've had this discussion many times with a couple of well-educated and knowledgeable motocross people, and we kind of wonder sometimes if there's only so many races you have in your human body, in your body that you can take.
Absolutely.
It's a brutal sport, and as you see, even the very best of the best make mistakes and hit the ground really hard. We saw Chase Sexton looks like on his way to his first Supercross win last Tuesday night here in Houston, and make one mishap, and he's he had a heck of an impact and hit the ground very, very hard. And it's hard on your body. There's no question about it. And you wonder sometimes the top mini bike or mini cycle champions that look like they're a can't miss candidate for the next championship. It take them either a long time to ever make it to a championship level, or they just honestly they never make it completely. And so I don't know. I don't know that you could do what I did. I think back to when I really started racing, to the time I won my very first national motocross race at 16 years old. I don't know you could do it in the time frame that I did. I did it in a 2.5 year period, maybe, from the time I raced my very first race on a 100cc MX Yamaha 100 to winning national championship level races. So it's a good question. Let's not forget to throw in our old good friend John Dowd. He started at a very older, much more mature age than the current flock of riders.
Yeah, absolutely.
How is John Dowd?
He did have one heck of a crash there, and I did call him and ask him how he was doing here recently again, and check up on him. And I think, we're all getting too old to hit the ground and have such an injury. And John still goes pretty fast, and it's probably some of the reason I'm trending towards vintage bikes more than modern bikes when I'm riding, because it's a tough one, and he's doing better. He is recovering, but I think he's probably have to reassess how much racing he's going to be doing on modern equipment.
But you're no slouch, though, Broc, because 3 years ago down in Italy at the Transpagaro, you were on a 450 Yam there, and you were not slow by any means. I think you won it, didn't you?
Yes, that's a fun race for me. Yeah, it was the Transpagaro race. The funny part is I kept getting asked to go from Danny Laporte, a good friend of mine, and I had not honestly been riding at all. And I finally told him, he asked me if you would just come over and look at the race, enjoy it. You don't have to race, you don't have to commit. Just bring some gear. If you'd like to, ride, we'll go ride in a few days before the race. And if you feel like you're comfortable enough to go race, then go race. So I hadn't had motocross gear on. I was telling Danny, I hadn't had motocross gear on since he and I shot, along with another group of Jean-Michel Bell and some old Ron Lachine and many of the old JT riders. We did when they brought back JT as the brand, we did a photo session, and I hadn't been on a motorcycle since that day with motocross gear on. And Danny thought I was lying to him, and I'm telling him I'm being dead truthful, Danny. I haven't put on motocross gear, and it's been 6, 7, 8 years. And so I went out and rode, and honestly, in one lap, I had full on arm pump, and I could barely hang on the bike. I'm like, this is not good. So then I went back out and rode a lap and a half to 2 laps, and it was like, okay, it's still terrible, but at least I can make it around. And then honestly, I started feeling funny, and I'm like, God, I feel like I'm car sick. And I honestly started getting motion sickness because I had not done an activity. I was going up and down. And this track was like an indoor, kind of a veterans supercross track with lots of tabletops and lots of jumps. And I couldn't even remember half of them when I rode around. So the long and short of it was I did this for no longer than 2, 3, 4 laps at a time, following Chuck's son or following Danny Laporte, or sometimes like maybe I think Jeff Stanton was there. I would try to follow these guys and just kind of get the riding back underneath me. And so that went on almost all day. These guys had lunch, they took their gear off, they were ready to go. And I'm still out trying to ride 1 lap, 2 lap, 3 lap sessions over and over and over. And I did this for, I must have rode 75 laps, but it was all nothing more than 1 or 2 laps at a time, 3 laps at a time. So by the end of the day, I finally decided to race, and I was able to win my class in the 1970 racers. And then I came back the next year and practiced a little bit more and was able to win that one. And then I did it one more time. And unfortunately, the COVID, after three years of it, the COVID shut it down. But so that's
another really good event. Another really good event.
I love that event. But yeah, in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, I've been riding much more than I was. There was about a 10-year window that I really didn't even ride after I retired, but now I'm enjoying it a lot more. I do a lot more.
When you retired, Broc, how long were you away from the sport? Did you just walk away from it and have totally nothing to do with it or watch it? Or because a lot of sports people seem to do that, when they finish, it's just like it's the busman's holiday thing. I don't know.
We talked to Jeff Stanton last week, and he said it's a real problem with old racers, I suppose you call us. When guys like you've been doing it all your life, and then all of a sudden it's not there. What do you do?
That's an excellent question, David, and in both of you guys, it really is. It's kind of hard to describe. Every personality type is different. I mean, some people, you have an easygoing, lucky-go-happy kind of rider that doesn't take things, I wasn't that type of person, and probably I kind of laugh and when I was on race day, it's always hard to. Race day was really a serious day for me, and for right or for wrong. I mean, sometimes that external, how you present yourself to the fans and the people, sometimes they think, he's not such a friendly guy or whatever. And me well enough that when I get to a racetrack, there's probably not anyone there that's not a friend of mine. I mean, if you're a motocross fan, you love motorcycles, I consider you a friend. But when I'm on race day, my mind's going a million miles an hour. I'm thinking of anything and everything that can happen, every situation. And I kind of like in modern era, Ryan Dungey was a little bit that way. I think Ryan was, as good as he was, there was always that little moment of a little bit of not doubt or just uncertainty that he wanted to, like, no stone was left unturned in his preparation. And I felt like I kind of had that too. But when in motocross and when I raced, every single thing that I did every single day of my life, I mean, if it was something I ate, if it was how well I slept, it was how well my training went, if it was off the motorcycle or on the motorcycle, all of that it was something that was always on my mind. And after doing it for 14 years professionally, and every single day for 365 days a year, you're thinking about what you're doing, training your body, and it does wear on you. And Jeff Stanton was right. When I stepped away, I wanted away. I mean, my final years at Yamaha were not as smooth as I would have liked them. It's pretty obvious that a lot of the, my teammates over the years, from it started with the Bob Hannas, the Rick Johnsons, and Jeff Stanton included, they all.
Jeff just now and mentioned that he was a teammate of yours.
Yeah.
And he did say that you were never late to anything as well.
It never was what?
Jeff also said you were never late.
Yeah.
So, like today.
Hey, I was an hour and something away today, and it's raining here, and it was traffic, and I was thinking, I was happy to stop. Honestly, I was happy to stop somewhere and just do it. But you guys said just go to the stadium, so that was your option there. So I'll let you know. So the point was that, with riding and prep for racing, when you're done, you're kind of done. And mentally, I needed a break from the sport. And so when I got done racing, I did take quite a few years away from the sport completely. Recharged my batteries, and then, you know, the passion of the sport and the love of the sport never went away from me. And you know, I've now been with Dunlop for over 20 years, and I still love coming to work every single week.
What actually is your role there, Broc?
I am the senior manager of our off-road racing, but it doesn't really just stop in off-road racing. Anything to do with in North America that we race on the dirt, I'm responsible for. It doesn't matter if it's enduro or motocross or pro or amateur, but we also, I wear other hats too when it comes to developing tires, product line planning. You know, we have input. The racing in our industry, you know, of course, in this industry, the racing constantly has to do with what product you're putting out to the consumer. So what we develop out in the pro level and what we learn at this the professional level always transfers to our product line. So that helps a lot. And in the U.S., I mean, Dunlop is the major tire company over here, no question about it. And we have the largest market share. So we definitely parlay the knowledge that we have out here working with these top riders and these top teams and technicians into our product. And it's you know, I wear many hats, and even in the marketing side of things too, we obviously market our success on the track to help.
What, for instance, Supercross that you're at the moment, what do you have to do there? What's your role there?
Yeah, it's not as, I will say this, with the restrictions they are right now, it's not nearly as active as it would be otherwise. Primarily, you know, I'm not doing any on-floor interviews with Ford Dunlop. I'm not helping with what even the Legends and Heroes program that we normally have at all these races that Dunlop helps sponsor. That's on the shelf right now with COVID. You know, there's still things that we do to track and make sure that the teams have the tires that they want, that our brand is represented properly. We're still doing a lot of race day live interactions with some of our new Team Dunlop elite riders that have been here each week. So I've been just coordinating, helping do all that, you know, at the races at the track. But it is odd. We're all kind of confided to our own, what they call pods. So basically, it's just our Dunlop team has to be within our own Dunlop paddock area. And, you know, we're not supposed to go, we don't go interact into the other paddocks. So we're not allowed into the Kawasaki or the Honda or the Yamaha under their tent, or the KTM guys. It's difficult.
No fans through the pits?
What's that? To the pit?
No fans in the pits?
You know, it's a very limited amount of fans. And if we had 10,000 fans in the stadium here at Houston, I don't know if 1,000 of them made their way through the paddock area. And it is an open area, but they're restricted to certain lanes that they can walk. And there's fences in front of each of the paddock areas, in front of each of the trucks, that they can't get within 6 feet of. And almost all the teams have their full awnings down, where in most Supercross races, they have the awnings and the windows up to where you can see the mechanics work on the bikes. But with this whole COVID, they don't seem to have nearly the visibility for the fans. So I'm not sure if I were a fan, I'd spend a whole lot of time in the paddock area.
So when did the love affair start with Yamaha, Broc? How did it all come about? You know, you just sort of sat on your Elsenor Honda, and some guy walks up to you and says, "Hi, you're riding for Yamaha next year."
You know, it's very funny that you asked that, because ironically enough, my very first motocross race ever, as I mentioned earlier, was on a Yamaha MX100. And I think it was either a 1972 or 73 model. I know it's the green one. I think one year they had a 90cc, and I think the next year they went to a full 100. So it was the 100cc model, whatever year that was. And then from that point on, the Honda Elsinore had come out. And although I had raced my first 100cc races, were on a Kawasaki Centurion, the Green Streak, the baby Green Streak, that we had modified enough to turn into a bit of a motocross bike, because my dad had such loyalty to the gentleman I mentioned earlier, Don Graves, and he was a Kawasaki. So we bought a 1969 or 70 model Green Streak 100 from a local Kawasaki dealer who happened to end up being the grandfather and grandmother of Jimmy Johnson, who became a 7-time NASCAR champion. So we had a lot of racing in our Jimmy's father raced motocross and flat track and all the different things, and Jimmy was quite an accomplished young motocross rider before he got into four wheels. So we had a lot of history of that. And then from there, I went on and raced the 100cc, and then the Honda Elsinore came out. And if you weren't on a Honda Elsinore, I remember seeing many starting line entries where every single motorcycle in a 125 race was a Honda. And that was, you'd have 30 or 40 Honda Elsinores lined up on the starting line around Southern California. So I was a Honda guy, and Marty Smith was a San Diego guy. And Marty Smith and Tommy Croft were two Team Honda riders, and they both kind of befriended me and let me tag along with them. And we became lifelong friends at that point. I used to camp with them, and we just had a great relationship for many, many years, up until, unfortunately, Marty's untimely death there this last year. But, I wanted to be Marty Smith's teammate on Team Honda. And so I started off the Nationals and raced my first race and had a decent enough race. And then the second race, I was running around in the top 3 or 4. And pretty soon, I guess my dad told me that the Yamaha team manager come poking around and started talking to my dad a little bit, just kind of talking to him, asking about what my plans were. And this was all of only two races into the National Series, and maybe up into the third race of the series. So I really, at that point, what plans? I'm just trying to learn if I can go out here and race some national motocross races. And so that's what happened there. And Yamaha seemed to have a lot of interest in me. It wasn't really much of a secret that Danny Turner was Bob Hanna's teammate, but it didn't seem like they were going to renew Danny Turner's contract. And so they were talking to me about my plans for next year. And so that kind of started, but I was personally honest, I was holding out thinking Honda's got to come knocking on my door. And by about the 4th race of the year, I went out at the Houston, the track here in Houston, and I won the first moto on a privateer DG Honda Elsinore that my dad and I worked on. And then I really do think I won by a long ways. And I really do think I would have won the second moto, and the piston ring broke, but I nursed it home for a third, and I got a second overall. And then the Yamaha guys were really, really knocking at the door. And I remember going over to the Honda guys and asking them for hey, listen, we broke a piston ring. Is there any way I could get a new piston ring that we could use for, this next weekend's race, because I'm not sure we're going to have time to go by a dealer and blah, 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 and this and that. And back then, a set of piston rings, I think, was around $9 or something, dealers cost. And the Honda guys, they had no interest in helping me, and they thought I was kind of, I remember having them, their attitude was like, are you kidding me? What are you asking us for a free piston ring for? And so maybe I was stupid, but I thought winning a national moto on a Honda would bring, hey, good job, kid, one of those kind of things. And they had no interest in signing me at all. And I guess I wasn't going to be Marty Smith's teammate. So at that point, I started talking more and being more receptive to the Yamaha program. And, I thought I was going to have one of those cool water-cooled 125s in 1977, but all things changed when the claiming rule came into effect.
Was it the very first evolution of the factory, the water-cooled bike?
Yeah, it was. In 1976, that's when Marty Smith was dethroned by Bob Hanna, and that Yamaha, I'm not sure when they were first few laps. I think the Honda probably ran a little bit better, but that bike right there was just as strong on the last lap as it was on the first lap. And the full new monoshock system, long travel, water cooling. And again, I thought this is going to be cool. In 1977, I'm going to come on, join the team, and I'm going to be riding this water-cooled bike, and everybody else is going to be on air-cooled bikes. But little did I know that didn't all work out like I thought.
For the people at home, Broc, I wondered if you could explain that claiming rule, because I read up all about it, and I couldn't believe what I was reading, how it works. It was just like madness.
It was a little bit of craziness. And if you look back at the history of 1976, especially the 125 class, there were multiple races. I mean, one race, Marty Smith rode just a production CR 125. They were riding, Bob Hanna rode that bike you saw in that photo, but they took that water-cooled engine out of it and put a production-based air-cooled motorcycle engine in it. And it was just a crazy time where you had a rule, and I don't remember the exact amount of it was cost wise, but it seemed like it was only about $3,000 or $4,000 or something in that area. And I think Terry Good's website probably gives the exact amount. It could have even been as low as $3,500. I don't remember. But any rider that was entered in the race had the opportunity to purchase any other rider's motorcycle that he competed against. So you had to made it into the field. It couldn't just be some fan or a buddy of his mechanics. So there were a couple of riders, particularly there was one gentleman named Mickey Boone, who in 1974, I believe, was the lone non-California factory Honda rider. There was Marty Smith, Bruce McDougall, and a guy named Chuck Bauer. And then Chuck Bauer's, then there was another guy, Mickey Boone was on the team. So he was only a 1-year guy. He was often, on the 1-year factory Honda rider, but he rode many AMA pro races, and it was a pretty darn good rider. Well, Mickey tried to buy, I believe it was Marty Tripes' factory Honda 250. And they, at one point, literally, I believe his name was drawn out of the hat because like Marty Tripes could put his money into the hat and counter claim at the motorcycle. And then Mickey Boone put his money into the hat, and then they drew numbers out of it, basically literally like a lottery drawing. And if they picked your name, if they picked Mickey's name or number, then he got the bike. And they had one technicality in the check. The way the money was written, it either had to be a bank check or a cashier's check. And there was one technicality that his was a cashier's check and not a bank check or vice versa. So they were able to somehow, the Honda guys and the AMA people said, well, you technically didn't, per exact wording, have the right check. So they disallowed that claim. Well, then the next time, this gave the factories times to where all the factories got together and the team managers would show up at the races with however many checks. They would each have like 10 separate checks. And if somebody filed a claim against this motorcycle, then the factory team managers would get every rider on their team. Plus, if they supported like a support rider, even that rode the same brand, they would ask them to please put their name in the hat. So they would stack these drawings, these lotteries basically against the claim. They would stack them against the guy trying to win this, sometimes 10 to 15 to 1 odds against this person. So lo and behold, all the factories got really nervous, and they didn't want their exotic motorcycles falling into the wrong hands, especially for such a nominal fee. When you're talking a $40,000, $50,000 Honda factory HR, a HRC RC 125 or 250 or a Yamaha water-cooled OW, they didn't want these guys, some rider to get this thing for $3,000, $4,000. So bottom line was they ended up stacking the odds, and lo and behold, a guy last name was Roeder. John Roeder, Hangtown. My old mechanic, John Rosensteel, John R. was Marty Tripes' mechanic at that time. And John Roeder, they drew his name out of the hat, and lo and behold, he ended up with a factory Honda bike. And my understanding is that bike's never really resurfaced. Like it wasn't.
It has. Yeah.
Oh, it has? Okay.
It was kept in a shipping container up until I reckon probably about 15 years ago. And then a vintage guy like me in the States, he knew the story, did some research, and he tracked John Roeder down, and the bike had not been ever used. It was still in the shipping container, and he managed to buy it, and now I think Terry Good's got it.
Yeah. So yeah, you know what? I think you're right. I think that's the bike Terry has. You're right. Now my memory.
I think.
Yeah. So it changed. It was crazy. It changed the whole series, and it changed my future too. Because here I signed with Yamaha, thinking I was going to ride this water cooled bike. Then the next year, we ended up. Nope. The factory said no water cooling for AMA. In Europe, everybody had water cooling. In America, nope, no water cooling, and that's changed kind of like a lot of history in my life, because we ended up with air-cooled kits on those motorcycles. They just had an air-cooled cylinder on top of a water-cooled lower end on the bike. And the bikes we had still had the cases for the water cool and the water pump that would go into the cases. And that in 1977, in a series that was only 6 races long, that's what happened to both Bob Hanna's bike and my bike at Hangtown. Is we had some preseason testing problems with the bikes where they didn't run properly. They really were down on power, and on the dyno they were supposed to be good, but when we actually physically rode them, they had really no torque, and if they came off the pipe, you could not get them back on the pipe without downshifting or multiple use of the clutch. So that water cooled, what ended up happening was we didn't ride them more than about 10 or 15 minutes at a time, and they were just terrible. So we had to wait until Yamaha in Japan built new pistons and new rings, sent them over. They didn't even arrive until a few weeks before the first national in Hangtown. Bob was out racing the Supercross series and other things. I was in school, and so I was the lone test rider to go out and test this new piston and ring. I went out and tested it, and it, the bike ran 100% better. Everything was good. I gave it the thumbs up. But my mechanic, I remember, he didn't want me riding the bike very much because he was in the middle of building it for the first national. And he's like, look, I don't have a bunch of spare parts. I don't have, you can't go out and beat this thing up and ride it. So once you ride it around, you feel like the power is good. Okay, we're done for the day. Thanks. I'll go back and get it ready for the race coming up in a week and a half or well. So in other words, we never got the bikes hot enough to fully test them. During the race, about 20 minutes into the moto, the engines got hot enough to where those little water pump bearings that were in the side cases that the Japan had left in there after they moved to take the water pump out, but the bearings were about the size of a little 10-cent, dime in America, and they just both fell out. And the one on the top was gravity. It fell out, and it worked its way down into the shifting, and both of our bikes quit shifting, Bob Hanna's and mine, and we ended up pulling into the pits with a DNF in the first moto. So as they were taking the cases off to examine what happened, I remember our team manager came by and told us, hey, stop what you're doing. Told our mechanics to quit, stop what you're doing, put your spare motors in. You don't have time to go find out, looking around, seeing what kind of gremlin it had. So we both put our spare motors in, and the exact same thing happened the second moto that happened to the first moto, that bearing got wedged into the shifting area to where it wouldn't shift. But ironically enough, they would only shift down, but they wouldn't shift up because the bearing was wedged between the case and the shift arm on what comes through from the shift shaft. And I remember it not shifting. I couldn't shift up, so I just left the bike in third gear and finished the last 20 minutes of the moto in one gear. And luckily enough, I was able to salvage some points, and Bob did the same thing, but he was in like second gear or something, so he ended up like a 16th, and I ended up actually realizing on the last maybe 5 or 10 minutes of the moto that the guy ahead of me in second wasn't really slowing down, or he wasn't really gaining on me, and I was kind of holding my own, and I was actually being kind of easy on the bike, not trying to blow it up. So I just figured, whatever, I don't have anything to lose here, kind of push it harder and harder and harder. So I started holding it on longer down the straightaway in third gear, topped out, and I started clutching it a lot harder coming out of the corners, and I started catching the guy, and I passed him on the last lap and got a second place. But that ended up being really what won a championship, because that was the year that we got down to the final race, and it got so close that we ended up having, that was when the famous, let Broc by pit board came out in the last moto. But it was that whole claiming rule and the lack of the water cooled motorcycle and all that, that ended up being, that was what kind of changed a lot of my history, and that claiming rule was what started.
The air cooled thing sort of followed you along for quite a few years, didn't it? But I'm talking about 490 now, but 84 Carlsbad. Run us through that. Actually, use the video, Adam.
It's the air cooling was so funny that to me, I guess it's not funny, it's just ironic. I mean, you look back at Yamaha, and they were the first company to come out with a water-cooled motocross bike. And I spent the rest of my career basically racing air-cooled, air hammers, not taking advantage of the technology, because Yamaha stuck with that high radiator design for so long. I mean, my 1980 Yamaha 125 was the first water-cooled bike that I raced, and it was heavy, and the weight was high. It was literally the radiator would heat the forks up so much that it had tons of air pressure. By the time the race was over, you couldn't touch the top of the fork tubes behind the radiator because they were so hot. And so design, it wasn't a good design. Unfortunately, it took them a long time to Yamaha. And even if you recall and look back at the 1981 factory Yamaha 250s, they were also water cooled, but they had it on the front handlebar area, triple clamp area. up on the number plate. And those bikes, we started off, rode about the first 5 or 6 rounds, and then we dropped all the water cooling off of them, went back to air-cooled bikes, and we raced air-cooled bikes for the next couple of years in the OWs and the 250s.
You say that because that mirrored what Neil Hudson was doing in the GPs. He had the water-cooled kits, which I think they had problems with, and he ended up winning the title on the air-cooled bike.
Yeah, it was an odd time at Yamaha then. Honestly, the factory, the department that built the OWs and the department that built the production bikes, they weren't even part of the same team, and they really seemed to not collaborate on anything that they did. I mean, the bikes were so different, and they were so different when you rode them. They were like you might as well just been on a different brand of motorcycle, and it was odd. You know, if you look back at the history in the U.S., you would see that there was so many times that, especially like with Bob Hanna in that era back in the 78, 77, 78, 79, he raced many times on Supercross and other races on YZ's production bikes and not the OW equipment that was available, because he felt the YZ was better bike.
I've asked this question before. Does the OW stand for Original Works?
You know, I really don't know. That's something I probably should know, but I don't. And maybe it does. I really don't know what it stands for. But
I've looked everywhere. I asked Scott when we interviewed Scott, obviously, who rode for Yamaha as well.
Yeah.
And he said the same. But getting back to the Carlsbad GP, you obviously were second a few times. Was that one of your highlights of your career when you won it?
You know, that was it. I wish I could say yes, but the answer is, I mean, yes, I like the fact that I won it, but to be honest with you, I should have won it in 81. I should have won it in 83, and I should not have won it in 84 when I did win it, and I should have won it again in 85, and I didn't win it. And so David Bailey and I kind of kid, but you know, the first 2 years I did ride on the OW, if you remember the OW machines. But then 84 and 85, 84 our bikes, they weren't, that was the first year Yamaha went to production bikes, and it was a couple of years before the rules changed in the AMA to where you had to be on production bikes in 86. So we were 2 years ahead of that, which was, you know, more to do with economics than it was to do with anything else. So the 84 bike, again, you know, I think David Bailey had more speed than I did that day. Really, David should have won it, and then he crashed out. And then the next year in 85, I had a little bit more speed, I think, and I should have won it. So we kiddingly say we should swap trophies because, you know, the fact that we really kind of both got lucky the years we won it. We kind of handed each other the win. But, you know, that's racing. We've all had a million stories just like that. What could have, would have, should have, could have, right? But the 81 was a little frustrating to me, no question about it. And the 83 was frustrating. I didn't ride it in 82. I rode the support class for some crazy reason. I have no idea why Yamaha, myself, Rick Johnson, and Scott Burnworth, we went 1, 2, 3 in the support class in the 250 class that day in 82. But it's, you know, I got nipped by a couple of like 2 point something seconds on the overall combined score times by Carl Quist the 1 year. And I that was just stupidity on my part and Yamaha's part, not understanding that how they scored. We figured if you went 2-1 and you won the second moto, you were going to be the overall winner. And then to find out that we didn't, it was disappointing. And that's another chapter where that was the last time ABC Wide World of Sports, they said, we'll never cover this race again unless we know the moment that the guy crosses the finish line, who the winner is and who's the second. I mean, ABC Wide World of Sports was the iconic US-based sports show that happened every weekend. And it was the, you know, thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. That was their tagline of their company. And that was what they went by for years. And they wanted to show the emotion of sport. They wanted to have a microphone in the winner's face the moment they finished their activity. And then they wanted to have a microphone in the loser's face. And they wanted to capture that aspect of the sport also, that emotion. And the fact that we had 30 minutes to figure out who the winner was, they were done with it. So Gavin Tripp, the British gentleman, Gavin Tripp, who started the ABC, you know, started the U.S. Grand Prix and obviously AMA, the Superbikers race and other great events in America. he came up with the brilliant idea to make just that one race would run under AMA co-sanctioned, but actually using AMA rules. So the second moto winner would be the winner. So the next couple of Grand Prix, they were the only Grand Prix that counted in the World Championships that were not run under FIM rules and did not use the overall combined score time of the winners, overall both motos times to find out who the winner was. So that's a little side note in the history of the sport. And it only lasted a couple of years until FIM, at that point, FIM realized this is really stupid to do the combined score or the combined time, because the second moto in motocross is almost always slower than the first moto because of track conditions. You know, if it's sand track, the second moto is always rougher than the first moto. If it's a hard pack track, there's usually a little tackiness like Carlsbad first moto, and the second moto is always burned out, blue grooves, slower. So very rarely in motocross is the second moto faster than the first moto. And the FIM realized that and said, you know, we're going to get rid of that rule and go back to the second moto as the tiebreaker.
Yeah, we used to get little snippets of World Motorsport over in the UK, perhaps a week or 2 weeks later. And I've still got the DVDs here from 1980 onwards. And to this day, I would say the production of that TV program has never been equaled. They had helicopters, they had this. It was just a fantastic, well put together program. Modern day race, promoters should watch and take some notes from that. It was a fantastic. The way they covered this was brilliant, totally brilliant.
Yes, yeah, Wide World of Sports, and it wasn't just for motocross. For us to have motocross on Wide World of Sports was such a huge thing, and sometimes it was disappointing that it would take 2 or 3 months after the race that it actually would be aired for the first time. But they did, such as you mentioned, the production quality, the storyline, even everything was top notch. And you mentioned the helicopter, and I cannot even tell you the feeling to get the whole shot. And in my first U.S. Grand Prix at Carlsbad, I went to the first U.S. Grand Prix as a fan many, many years. And from there, I remember that helicopter flying overhead. But to be physically on the motorcycle, and I got the whole shot in '81, my first time riding that 500 Grand Prix there, and to come around the first horseshoe corner and you could hear that helicopter. And then you go around the next little corner and then the famous kind of ledge corner that we all knew well. It seemed like sometimes that helicopter was like literally you could reach out and touch it. You could hear it and you could literally feel how that helicopter's present. I mean, something beating on your chest, and you'd hear especially if you had an American flag and you're an American rider leading this international race, and the helicopter there and all that there and the fans cheering. It was something else. I mean, it's a memory I'll never forget, and it was fantastic.
You mentioned Carlquist, Broc. Did you know him well?
I knew him well enough. I mean, obviously he was such a, just a fierce competitor, and he was fantastic rider and just as strong as you could possibly be. And and he was a Yamaha rider, and he obviously worked with, I spent some time with him testing some Olean suspension and some different things in Europe with him. But he's I'm sorry that he dearly missed. I hate too many of my people I raced with and have moved on in life, and it's a sad deal. But Carlquist was quite a champion, and he did it on Husqvarnas, he did it on Yamahas, and he was amazing competitor.
Why I asked Broc if it was a high point of your career, because Ricky Johnson, when we spoke to him, he said he called the sort of 490 a pile of pinging whatever, and he said what you'd done on it was absolutely amazing, And in the '84 Grand Prix, you're up against HRC Hondas, blah. That's why I thought, and I don't think you were feeling too great on the day. And I think the sign of a great champion for me is somebody that churns out a result even when it's not going their way. Anyway,
thank you. It's I look back and people ask me about my career, and I at 2 different times had Honda contracts signed by the Honda staff, and all I had to do was put my name on them. And I had 2 times multi-year contracts, and opted to stay with Yamaha, and I kind of always felt that the loyalty and stay with one brand was going to be a good thing. And I can, looking back in hindsight, I had a nice career. I do feel there was times, we weren't on the best equipment. And when you mentioned even you line up against those HRC Hondas and the factory Kawasaki's and the Suzuki's even were fantastic back then. And it wasn't just, you had 2 or 3 Americans on those HRC 500s, but you also had 2 or 3 Europeans on those HRC 500s. So you had half a dozen of those things to beat. And I actually later on in about 84 got a chance to ride one of those bikes. And that was a mistake to not sign that contract. I can tell you that. It was, it was shocking. I never knew a motocross motorcycle could be so phenomenal.
When did you come to get the test one?
Yeah, I can't disclose that here, but I actually got a chance to ride. It was kind of fun. I had 2 or 3 friends from different teams, and we practiced together a lot. And I had a chance to take a lap take more than one lap, even on my own private practice track or a track.
What number was on the bike?
What's that?
What number was on the bike?
I don't know. It was red, but Dave, yeah, I'm not
How good was it compared to your Yam?
Honestly, there was there were a couple of sections on our track that had a couple of really nasty bumps and things, and one of them, they had a big boulder on the outside of this bump, and it always scared me. Like, if I ever crash here, I could literally face plant into this giant boulder and die. But and I don't want to do that. So I remember riding that Honda through that section, and it was as if the bump wasn't there, and I'm not exaggerating one bit. And I'm like, this is impossible. And I turned around and I just pulled over, and I turned around, went right back through that section again. I go, that was just one lucky time, right? That's not true. And I went and did it again. I go, yes, it is true. And it just literally, the bike, it didn't even twitch. It didn't do anything. The Honda brakes and the whole balance of the motorcycle was completely on a different level. It had fantastic brakes. The balance, the harder you hit the brakes, it never felt like it kicked forward. It always just felt like it just kind of settled and squatted from the center middle. It never really loaded one into the bike. And, when you come into most corners hard, and you get on the front brake, the rear gets pretty darn light. The Honda seemed to just kind of squat, and the rear brakes still worked, and the rear tires still contacted the ground. And it was kind of odd to me, because it felt, when a motorcycle handles that well and the chassis is that good, it almost makes the engine feel slow. And, the Yamaha was more exciting to ride, no question about it. It hit a lot harder and did, all sorts of wild things when it came on. But I think that was a byproduct of the fact that the better handling motorcycles always feel slower than the ones that are not handling as well feel fast. It's just kind of like I said, a byproduct. And, the unit track, the Kawasaki was good. Kawasaki in the U.S. was just really getting on to, working with shock dynos and things like that. And they really honestly were the first of the companies, in my opinion, that utilized like shock dynos, and particularly a lot more low speed compression to never have the wheel speed get up that high. And I was looking back, talking about YouTube. Someone did send me a YouTube of the 1983 Motocross of Nations at Angro in Belgium there. And if you watch Jeff Ward's motorcycle, it looks as good as about anybody's down some of that choppy, fast straightaways. And it was, Roy Turner and his whole crew at the time, they were playing a lot. They were spending a lot of time on shock dynos, and I think they made some good advancements. So the Kawasaki's were quite good too.
On that note, actually, Broc, I've put a little video together for so I wanted to get onto the motocross destinations, because I always thought it was like one race, but it was obviously over certain weekends. But we'll reminisce.
You newbie guys, you don't even understand the sport. I try to explain these guys now. Hey, the old days back when I did it, you only rode one time. I go, yeah, I did have a lot of injuries, and it was kind of frustrating to me, because Motocross of Nations today is still my favorite event, and it's just such a fantastic race to attend and participate in. And the fact that I only got to be on the Motocross of Nations one time because of I got selected 2 or 3 more times, but I always had to opt out because of nagging injuries, and I had a broken wrist one year that the bone in the navicular would not heal. But I did ride 2 Trophy to Nations, and that was called the Trophy to Nations, and that was all 50s. Yep, and that was in '83, and then '84. I rode Czechoslovakia in '83, and then in Sweden in '84. So, yeah, there was up until 1985. Was that it, Dave? I think was that the last. 85 was the first year of the current.
I think it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, 84 was the last year of the 250s on one weekend, and the 500s were the first week, and the 250s were the second week.
But like I said about the 84 American GP, like 83 Motocross Des Nations. Again, you're on the Yam, they're all on the other bikes. But anyway, let's watch it.
And Broc Glover at the top of the hill almost gets side by side with Joe Bay. Oh man, what a race this is. Glover doing everything in his power on the uphills and the downhills and everywhere on the racetrack to try to make the move, to try to take over that #1 spot, but it doesn't seem to be working yet. Glover once again comes right up on the rear wheel of Joe Bay on the downhill. Broc loses a little momentum on the kicker, but still they're within 2 bike lengths. Man, this is the kind of racing we like to see. Man, this is good racing in the Motocross Des Nations. Belgium versus the USA. At this moment, it's Joe Bay versus Broc Glover. Wow. And again, Glover makes a run on him on the downhill, but loses a lot of momentum at the berm at the bottom. Probably loses about 4 or 5 bike lengths. Broc is up again by a couple of bike lengths. Charging, hitting the downhill wide open. Touching the bottom of the hill, squaring off to the inside. Catches the bump on the uphill. Catches a lot of traction and just lances on by Joe Bay. Man, this is what racing is all about. And way better than to have it happen with the Motocross Des Nations. Man, what a fine ride by Broc Glover. Early part of the moto, set back, just waiting for the opportunity until it came, making the pass, taking the riders one at a time, finally moving into the lead while Joe Bay did an excellent job of winning the first moto in Czechoslovakia and the Trophy to Nations, just like he did in Belgium the week before. What a fine ride by Broc Glover. Wow, this is going to be interesting when everybody crosses the line. The two Wards work up from a pretty poor start to 7th and 8th. And for the Belgians, the best they could come up with.
Ďalej, súdruh Juraj Čigáš, člen pléna okresného výboru komunistickej strany Slovenska v Považskej Bystrici a predseda organizačného výboru. Ďalej, inžinier Peter Magváši, kandidát vied.
Oh man!
What?
Commentating by Gary Bailey there, huh?
What amazes me, Broc, is when you look at the list of names that were in those races, you know, and you must have winning the first race of each meeting. It must have just took a hell of a lot of pressure off for the rest of the team?
Yeah, the first is kind of a little story here about how much time we have here, because none of my stories seem to be that short, but a lot of the first race of Motocross Nations, those were 4-man teams, Belgium, and in Belgium there, 4-man teams, and only 10 teams made it to the A final. And so you had 40 riders on the gate, obviously, 4 times 10. So the American team was the reigning champions, so we didn't have to qualify, but they still participated in the lottery to pick your number. So they threw in 1 through 10, you picked your hat, number out of the hat, and the AMA delegate picked out, drew the name right out of the hat, first pick, and he drew number 10. So that means the American teams, 4 riders, picked 10, 20, 30, and 40. And, being the reigning AMA 500 champion, the last thing in the world I thought was that our team captain, Roger DeCoster, was going to have me pick 40th. And that's what he had me do. So I was like, are you kidding me? Like, I'm the reigning champion. I mean, Mark Barnett's a fantastic rider. He had never raced a 500 in his life. Maybe we let me pick 10th or 20th and hopefully be able to get a good race. And then, maybe in case, Roger's theory was that I was probably the fastest guy, so that I should be able to work my way up from a bad start. But I don't know, working your way up from a bad start and getting a 12th is really what you need. You kind of need to get a whole shot, get a couple of good, you want a couple of good races, good counter motos in there, so you can count those and you get a couple of throwaways. So needless to say, I wasn't real excited about picking 40th out of that world class. You got 40 of the best riders in the world, and I get to pick 40th on a fairly short start, and I get to pick the outside worst gate pick. So going back to my history of, so when I go into the park for May and I'm the 40th guy and I wheel up to the starting line and they throw up the whatever 1 minute, 2 minute card, whatever it was. And at that time, the weather had been changing. It was typical Belgian weather. The weather was moving in off the English Channel, and the clouds were coming in. It's like, man, we're going to get some rain here today. This is not looking real good. So as I'm sitting there on that big old air hammer, gigantic air-cooled bike, the thing starts loading up. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Like, honest to God, it started loading up, and I'm going to foul a plug on my first Motocross of Nations ever. I'm fouling a plug on the starting line, and there's nothing you can do. You're already lined up. The card's up. The mechanic can't come do anything. You're like, I don't know what to do. Luckily for me, I raced some of the very first Elsinores 125s, and in the very first, I don't know if you had that problem in England, but in the US, when the Elsinores came over here, the pilot jets were a little bit too big, and sometimes if you started them when they were cold and they didn't warm up just right, they would literally load up and they would foul a spark plug. And the only way to have them not quit to where you had to stop, sometimes you'd have to turn the petcock off, lay it over the side. You had to drain the float bowl, put a new plug in it to get it to start. And I remember guys doing that. And then I also remember guys who got smart enough, you left the throttle on wide open and you turn the petcock off, and don't let that throttle up. Whatever you do, if it stalls, you're done. So I'm sitting on the starting line of Motocross of Nations. The card's already up. I'm turning the petcock off on this OW 500, and I'm holding the throttle on wide open as it's going boom, 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 boom. And I'm going, you've got to be kidding me. If this thing gets running again, I'm going to take off dead last, and it's a joke. I'm so frustrated. And honestly, it started about 10 seconds before I knew the card was going to go sideways. And all of a sudden, the guy walks over to tap the card, first like turn, and it starts going boom, 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 and it starts revving up and cleaning out. And I'm like, oh my God, I reach down, I turn the petcock back on, I put it in gear, and within 1 or 2 seconds, the damn starting gate drops. I come around the first corner on the outside, about second place behind Barnett. I come out of the first corner leading the race, and I went on to win the moto. And I was literally 5 seconds away from not even making the start of the race. And so it was like, thank goodness I remembered what a Honda Elsinore back in 1974 was like, but it was so funny. And then we went on to the Motocross Trophy of the Nations the next week. I mean, I remember the second moto, I got a start that you would expect without all the adrenaline. And it was raining. I remember my roll-offs came off, and I had no goggles, had to take goggles off, and I'm just getting pelted with no goggles back in 15th place. I had a terrible, I think I got 12th or so. I was a terrible race. And I was so frustrated. So we go on to the next race, be able to win the first moto, as you saw. And then the next moto, it was fantastic. We were, it was myself and I think Ward and Joe, and no, it was Gabors, Eric Gabors, dicing for the lead. And that's the weirdest, like, I keep getting this pit board, like, stay where you are, stay where you are. Everything's okay. Like, we're going to win. Because at that point, you're really, the mechanics are looking at everybody's finishes and what motos get thrown out and this and that. And it's really like do not, and Eric Gabors was not going to let the Americans win again. I mean, he was riding very aggressively and also very, he was holding us at bay, no question. He was not going to let us by, and without some contact. And so I remember, you know, the pit board's just like, stay where you are, stay where you are. So it was hard to do, you know, not to try to pass, because I didn't want to get too aggressive on Jeff Ward. And you know, and it wasn't necessary. If I would have tried to pass him, what if we both crashed and I'd be the biggest idiot, the biggest goat on the team? And then you had Gabors out there. So Jeff and I just kind of hung out behind Eric and raced him as hard as we could. We would have tried to pass him if we had the opportunity, but not with too much risk, no question about it. We wanted to make sure that we won, and we did. And you know, the favorite part of that is that bike that I rode that day. I still have that bike, and it's exactly the way it came off the track, including with the wires and the same tech inspections, little safety wire from the FIM, and it's
250.
Yeah, that bike I rode in that race picture of Czechoslovakia. I have.
Fantastic.
Yeah. It still has the green number 3 plate. It's the way it came off the track, including, like I said, with the same tires.
You keep that at home?
I do. Yeah.
What I loved about watching those videos, although they're cut down really short, the one in Czechoslovakia, Broc, I just found really nice to watch, because I just felt like there was loads of racecraft going on. You know, you were coming down that hill like you were just getting ready to pounce. You know, you were just testing it out every time. Yeah, even that video doesn't do justice. I mean, that was one of the early video cameras. It's so old, but it doesn't do justice how steep that hill was. It was literally, that's my favorite. Yeah, absolutely. There's a really nice photo. That's one of my favorite motocross photos, particularly in my career, is a picture taken from the backside, cresting that downhill that you saw. It's me coming off the top and feet on the pegs, coming from some big roost coming off the back. And that's that downhill, and all you can see is the fans on the other side of the valley, because that was true motocross. I can tell you right there. They didn't have a whole lot of tractors and bulldozers on that track. It was an awesome track.
Another question I've got for you: the YZM 500. Did you ever get to try that?
I never did get to ride it. I got an invite a few, maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago to go ride a vintage race in France. And I was going to go over there and do it. It would have been nice. And unfortunately, they had some problems they always held a race, I guess, to fundraise, to bring people over. And the race they held to get the funds to bring the riders over, it was just a disastrous weather-wise. And they had a lot of rain, and they really had the participation rate was very, very down. So they didn't generate much revenue. So they had to pass on paying my airplane ticket and go over there. So that was my one opportunity to ride the YZM. And then the opportunity and the invitation hasn't happened again. But I would love to just try to ride the bike one time, just to give it a test go, just to kind of see. And
you were still a Yamaha guy when that bike was in the Grand Prix, weren't you? Obviously, I know you didn't in the States, but you never explored any idea about trying it, or never got the opportunity?
You know, I would have liked to have. As a matter of fact, at the end of my career, when they never offered me a chance to ride that bike. Anytime I ever rode, in '88, if you remember at the Hollister Grand Prix, they put a 490 motor in a YZ250 frame, which was a bike that you see, a very similar bike that you saw. I think Doug Dubach rode one at the Harley Castle. But that was a pretty nice bike. The 88 Yamaha was a pretty darn good bike. I actually liked the 88. I think the Honda motor was a little smoother and all that, but that 88 Yamaha I thought was a good bike. The 87s and 6s weren't particularly anything to ride home, but I think Yamaha really turned it around in 88 and came up with a pretty nice motorcycle. And the 250 chassis was nice, and they put that 490 motor in it, and it did help a lot. And it was certainly a much better motorcycle than the YZ490s that I rode back in the 84 and 85. But it was.
At the Hollister Grand Prix, is that where your mechanic said, tell me where you're holding the throttle to stop it pinging, and then took the slide out and filed the needle down?
I had from about 81 all the way through 87, I guess 86, 87. John Rosenstiel was my mechanic, and he's a brilliant mind, and he could figure out things. I mean, he would jet carburetors in Colorado at almost a mile high in elevation. He would jet them, base it off of a calculator. He would look at like a percentage of difference between sea level and there, and barometric pressure. And I honestly, I would show up at Colorado National, and everybody was out there jetting their bikes. And the two strokes before the EFI and all that, you actually had to jet carburetors. It was a crazy concept, right? And so he would be out there, and I would see all these other riders pulling in and changing jetting. I would just show up half the time and just ride the bike. And I won the Colorado 500 National quite a few times. And I some of it had to do with John R. He was just that good. My bikes just seemed to run right, and he knew how to jet them, and he'd get them pretty done. And rarely would we ever have to change just one minor needle clip, or possibly a main jet or a needle, just minor changes, never much of an issue. So he was quite good there.
Broc, how did the KTM deal come about at the end, with the Grand Prix? 89 or not? 89, wasn't it?
Yes, 89, yes. So, I grew up as a fan of the sport as much as any, but I mean, when I grew up, like I mentioned, the Husqvarna importer Edison Dye in San Diego, the Torsten Holm, I was always like the European guys, the whole sport, the European riders. You had the Swedes of Arne Kring and Bent Aberg, and these riders, all the list of long, fantastic Swedish riders. You had guys like Gunnar Lindstrom come over from to America. You had Lars Larsson's set up and become the Husqvarna importer. And once in a while, we'd have a rare sighting of actually Torsten Holm, who to this day is one of my favorite people in our sport. I just love that guy. He's an awesome guy. And so I grew up, and then you had the Belgians of Joel and Roger and Sylvain Gabors, and these guys were, to me, they were motocross, and I always had that passion for the European races, the colors and the pageantry, how you'd see the opening ceremonies where people would walk behind each country's flags. It was magical, and to me, and it always had this big draw, and I always had so much respect for it that I always dreamed about doing some Grand Prix racing. And towards the end of my career at Yamaha, it was clear that they were moving in a different direction that did not include me. And I did try pretty darn hard to get a Yamaha ride in the Grand Prix, and they were filled up. They had Pekka Bekanen, and they had their riders. They really didn't, at that point, have room for me, and so there was really no real interest in that. And my whole career being with Yamaha at that point, kind of, I don't know, I think people just associate me with that brand, and there wasn't a lot of other movement available or opportunities there. So I was like, well, I guess I'm just going to retire, and be done with it. And then Selvaraj from KTM approached me, and KTM was based, they had a West Ohio based, was the KTM East, and the KTM West was in El Cajon, where I grew up. So he asked about, asked to have a little meeting, and we talked, and he said, KTM's at really a big crossroad in the company right now. Their sales are not where they want them to be. They need to be able to penetrate the United States market, and the motorcycle that they're selling currently doesn't really, is not attractive to the American consumer, clearly. So we would like to develop a motorcycle that we feel would be more of a global bike, and particularly one that would be appealing to the American market. So we're going to switch things up, and we need somebody that could help develop it, race it, put their name on this bike and help us guide us down that direction. So that's where it all started, and it came about as that, I would come over and help them develop the motorcycle, try to make it as American friendly as possible, and then also try to, compete in the 250 Grand Prix. And it was a really interesting time, because the company, I didn't realize it had gone financially to the level it had. and it was going through a bankruptcy. And at that point, the Austrian government had taken it over in receivership, and the Austrian government had come in to try to save the company, to save all the jobs in Austria and et cetera. So it was very, very interesting times, having meetings with financiers from the Austrian government, and trying to get a feel for the company, and trying to also race. We really had literally no parts, zero. There was foundries weren't creating and producing parts because they hadn't been paid for the last 2 or 3 orders that they produced, and we were lucky to make it through to each of the races, and we would have missed the very first Grand Prix. The bike would have not been ready, but the Yugoslavian Civil War broke out, and they canceled the first GP, which was it was a schedule originally in Yugoslavia.
That's right. So
Where
I've read that you really tried to make a Yamaha out of that KTM. Was there any truth in that?
No, there's really no truth in that at all. I mean, everybody has their assumption what it was. I tried to do the best I could with what we had. And again, literally, we had 2 cylinders the entire year, and they were ones that had been ported to the point where they had started losing power, and they had been put up on the shelf waiting for the new ones to come from the foundry, and then they never came, and then they ended up becoming our race cylinder and our backup cylinder. And they were kind of like the one that had gone a little too far and the one that had gone a little too far more than that one. And those were our 2 race cylinders, and that's what I raced on. I had no practice bike. I had an old 89, just a stock bike they'd given me off of a production bike. That's the only thing I had to practice on. So I really had very, very limited amount of training and riding. And it was a challenging season, to say the least. But the bike itself, if I had to say which manufacturer that bike probably had more of a feeling of, would have a Honda more than a Yamaha, actually. I mean, actually, there were times we struggled a lot for some reason with the brakes on the motorcycle, and they used to get air bubbles in the lines, and they never could figure out how to do that. So at one point, honestly, we took off the Brembo brakes and put a Honda front brake on the motorcycle, because at least it would not develop air bubbles and get soft throughout the race. So, but I would have to say that the bike, again, it was probably ergonomically and the way the whole felt was a little more Honda-esque than Yamaha.
You did have some good results on that bike that year. I mean, that 250 season, that was the year that Bell won. I mean, it was a pretty stacked. It was a stacked group of guys. There was no question. I remember Jean-Michel. I had met Jean-Michel at a very young age, when he was still on mini bikes, and we developed a friendship over our whole lives on that. And I'd gone to his house at times, and sorry about that. I should put on silent. Jean-Michel had, was riding the Honda, and we had times where we could go out and ride and kind of run the bikes against each other and things. And he was always surprised at how far off the KTM still was at his bike. But, he was a fantastic rider, and he won the world championship quite easily that year. But I did have some success towards the end. And I want to tell you, kind of an odd story. The bike had come with a Keehan carburetor, and we'd run Keehan carburetors all the way through the season. Like the last race or two, for some reason, like we didn't have any cylinders to port. We didn't have any parts to do it. The only thing we could change was really a pipe. And I had Mitch Payton make me a couple of different pipes and send them over. And the other things we could do was change the carburetor. And somehow out of the blue, my mechanic, Graham Kent, decided, we should try one of these DeLorto carburetors. And to me, DeLorto carburetor, I was like, I've never ridden a motorcycle that I know of had a DeLorto carburetor, maybe a Cajiva or something, We put this DeLorto carburetor on that KTM, and it was like, holy, wait. We just picked up 1,000 RPM on the top. We just, it doesn't lay down at the top. It keeps pulling. It's like, this was the biggest positive change we did to the motorcycle the entire season. And by the last race, that race in Angro, the last moto of the year, that same track at the Motocross of Nations that we just saw, I won the last moto on the thing. So it was, and I probably had a good chance to win the overall or be in the top couple, but I came in a corner in a rope, believe it or not, that was buried in the berm that I never saw. It was just a track marker, a rope that they'd used to run around the track had gotten pulled out into the berm.
and I came through on the first lap of the first moto, and the thing got wrapped around the rear wheel, so I had to stop and get cut out. And then the second moto, I came back and won the moto. So it was nice to win the last GP moto of my entire career, and I retired right after that. And I was also able to win the last AMA Supercross of my entire career at the LA Coliseum. So my last AMA Pro race and my last FIM GP race, I won. So yeah, it's a nice way to go out, I guess. But hey, speaking of KTM, would you recognize the company today as what you saw?
That's exactly what I was just going to say to you, Broc. Did they offer you shares at the time when you were leaving or anything?
Lord, I wish I could have said yes, but yeah, that whole, it was very, very interesting. At one point, honestly, I was in Matakoven and staying there to try to work on the bike and do some different things, and I had a hotel room lined up, and my main contact, he was the export manager of KTM. He did all the global exports, so he was his client was the United States, obviously. So Franz Solhammer, he tells me, "Hey, would you mind sharing your room with somebody?" And I looked at him like, "Excuse me? Would you mind sharing your hotel room with somebody tonight?" Well, actually, it's not just for tonight. It's actually for the next 3 nights. And I felt like some strange man, like what are you talking about? And he's like, "Well, there's a lot of people in town right now. And this is a little town. We don't have many hotel rooms, obviously, and all the Airbnbs, or at the time what was kind of bed and breakfast, they're all filled up, and you have a double room, and he's a real nice guy." And I was like, "Okay, well, and I would have probably said no if it weren't for Franz. And he was such a fantastic guy, and I really enjoyed him. I trusted him, and so I said yes. And then, lo and behold, this guy I shared this room with for 3 days, he was the head bean counter. He was the financial guy from the Austrian government, and I learned more in those next 3 nights than. And he asked me 1,000 questions, and I asked him 1,000 questions, and when it was all said and done, they saved that company, and later, obviously, Stefan Pierre came in, and KTM is just they're truly one of the most remarkable business stories I've ever. I just can't believe. I'm so impressed with what they are today.
Broc, can I be rude? Can you remind us how old you are, or how young you are, rather?
Oh, I think there's a Wikipedia page you can find out now. I'm 60, and I'll be.
What I was going to say was, if you want to start a new business, I will buy into this straight away on how to remain young. You look. I know we're a million miles away. You look about, I would say 40 from where I'm stood.
Yeah, I wish I. You know what? I don't even think about the age being such. It is kind of funny, but. Yeah, both my parents are still alive. I talked to my dad yesterday, and he's still kicking around. And I think I take better care of my health than my father did. So I'm hoping to, they're well into their 80s, and my dad's 87, and so.
You look very good for it.
For people watching, let's see how quick Broc is. This was only about 6 months ago, I think.
Uh-oh. Honestly, that's I don't know if it's embarrassing, but it's I felt so bad that I hated that track. I don't know what it was. That it was just a brand new bike, and I didn't even check the ride height. Honestly, I felt terrible. I had not been practicing at all before, and when I see it, it shows. Yeah.
But I'm thinking. I think it was Pastrana on the actual 490, wasn't it? And you were on the modern bike. But I'm looking at those jumps, and I'm thinking, you change when you get older. You change. Years ago, I used to ride years ago, and years ago, you just think nothing of it. And there's you still clearing the jumps and.
It was funny because when I got there, they said, "Oh, it's a real easy little vet track," and then they brought in somebody that works on the Dirtworks crew that builds the AMA Supercross series. And every time I turn around, every time there was a little 5-minute or 20-minute, 30-minute break, I'd see the tractor out there, and each time I'd ride the track, the jumps got bigger, taller. Well, we need this one because Travis wants to backflip, you know, and like, okay, so you're making it bigger, so Travis can backflip, and I like so it was kind of a fun deal. That was a Moto Fight Club, and that was a beyond fun event just to be part of and help.
Are they doing another one?
What's that?
I think they're doing another one, aren't they?
Yeah, they've done some different Moto Fight Clubs. Actually, my phone rang a little bit ago. That was the gentleman who dreamed it all up and started it all, Mr. Rob Bidos. But it's a really neat format, to be honest with you. It was fun, and we raised a ton of money for charity. I think we raised over $60,000 for charity. I know for a fact over $20,000 went to my charity of my cause, which was the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. So it was, you know, it was during a full COVID lockdown, it was a crazy times. I mean, seemed like when I flew on an airplane there were probably about 5, 6, 7 people on the whole plane, and it was such uncertain times, and be able to put a race on live that's a legitimate race. And it was a match, as you probably remember, they were just 1 or 2 lap races in a match play. And the guys in the first one, I pretty much created the format on it, and they thought I was nuts that they only were going to go a couple laps. And then by the time they were done, a guy like Kevin Windham must have rode 15, 20 races. He was so tired, he had to like throw a timeout flag here and go, "Hey, I can't go back to the starting line. I just came off the track like 2 minutes ago and I'm completely exhausted." So, you know, talking about somebody that can still ride a motorcycle years after his retirement, that Kevin Windham is one talented rider.
I think it was a really good format, and at the time there was nothing else, was there? That was our only. I watched it, you know, late into the night because it was our only form of moto. There was nothing else on at all.
Yeah, it was fun. It really fit. They've done a mini bike one, and they've done a couple other ones. They're looking to do some more. I mean, you know, it's not an every week thing, and nobody's trying to compete against the Supercross or the AMA Motocross or series. It's just supposed to be what it is: entertainment, racing motorcycles, having fun, and it was all of that.
Yeah, but it's just nice for the fans like me to see, you know, Bradshaw was there, and Kevin Windham, yourself, Stanton. It was just good to see those guys from slightly different eras, you know, all having a chance to race against each other. It's just a good format.
It was, and that's what it was supposed to be. We tried to pick some really good rivals. Unfortunately, I didn't get, you know, what ended up happening, you know, and also we ended up losing a rider. Ivan Tedesco had a little health scare there the morning of the race, which I have no idea, just got real dehydrated and had some issues. But we were trying to pick some of those classic rivals. You know, you look back and you say, obviously, the Bradshaw Stanton rival is a fantastic rival. And then you even remember the Pastrana and Windham rivals, even when they were on the same team in Suzuki. And of course, nobody can forget the Villopoto and Alessi's growing up at a young age. From the time they were on mini bikes all the way through, they had this crazy rivalry. And so it was really, really fun. And the Weimers and Tedesco. So we picked strong rivalries and had those guys. We made sure, and it took a lot of moving around to make sure that each guy got to race one of their riders of their rivalries. And unfortunately, I was the grandpa of the group. No, I didn't really have anybody, but if we were to do another one, we would certainly we would try to bring in maybe 3 or 4 from more of my era.
Absolutely. Well, I think we better let you go, Broc. I think we've taken up enough of your time.
Yeah, before you go, Broc, I hope that is the website for the Cystic.
Yeah, if you Google Team Dangerous, and you have to spell Dane like we spell our son's name, it's Dayne, and then you just put the Jurus on the end, so it's Dangerous with Yegerous. And if you do so, Team Dangerous. And then you type in CFF.org. So Cystic Fibrosis Foundation is CFF. And you'll see we have a Great Strides page, it's called. And, you know, they've just closed the 2021 fundraising, and we'll start back our 2020 fundraising, excuse me. And we'll start doing the 2021 here pretty soon. And, you know, that's a team. And we've had a Team Dangerous backed team at the Farley Castle race, as you know. international air hammer guys, and Rory and Neil, and those guys have always been so generous, and to run the logos, and you know, it's nice just bringing some awareness to a terrible disease that afflicts a lot of people around the world, and they've made tremendous progress and create incredible new drugs. That one particularly that just came out about a year ago that is extending people's lives by decades, not years. And it's been in all of that. There's no government funding for it, and it's all been done through private donations over the last 30, 40 years of the organization, and they've been incredible progress for people. And our son Dane suffers from cystic fibrosis.
Well, for the people watching, like what Broc's just explained, if you enjoyed tonight's, even if you didn't enjoy it, you can go online and donate some money to cystic fibrosis. It's an amazing charity. And,
you know, and it's ironically enough, although it covers all spectrums of the world's population, there is a larger amount percentage-wise in the UK than most parts of the world. So it is something dear to the people in the UK, no question about it.
Before you go, Broc, we'll rewind back to 1984 and end on a good note when you won the US GP. So everybody watching, thank you so much.
You know what? 1984 was honestly, that was probably the only highlight of my entire 1984 year. 84, when I look back at my career, I think, oh yeah, I had some really good years in the 70s on the 125s, and I look back at 81 was a really, really good year for me, winning championships and the Trans USA titles, and then 83 was solid, 85 was solid, but 84 was not one of my favorite years. But you guys, the Wide World of Sports was, maybe I should look at it more. I should look at it as a class.
It's a cut down version, obviously. Because
all right.
Did you, maybe on the first corner, did you give a Honda rider a little nudge?
In 84?
I don't know if it's shit. I thought I watched one. I'm sure it was, maybe it was earlier. I'm sure you came into the first corner. You were on the inside, but I think you gave Andre a little bit of an elbow, and he shot wide, and you just came out of that first left-hander, and you were gone.
I don't know that I ever on purpose gave anyone an elbow or whatever. I mean, I might have been out of control, and I don't think I could have moved Andre even if I would have given him an elbow. He was a pretty stout guy.
It was a heavily
he and Dave Thorpe and all those guys, and then you had Eric Gabors on the other spectrum there on those powerhouse teams of HRC back then. But Andre was a fantastic champion, nothing but respect for him, and I don't think I ever rode that way, to be honest with you. I ended up probably on the ground more than it'd be upright if I tried to ride too dirty. So, but yeah, who knows? I don't remember. You will have to watch it on the tube here. So
well, like I say, all the best in the future, Broc, with the tyres, obviously Dunlop and racing on the racing and etc. Thank you so much for coming on. Been real great insight to your career and everything. So let's end with 6-time AMA champion, 2 times MX Nations winner, American Grand Prix winner, Broc Glover. Yeah.
Don't forget the.
Sorry, say that again.
I said, don't forget the 125 Grand Prix too. I won one of those.
Oh yeah, the ones from. I'm just.
The next time.
I'm just kidding. All right, you guys. Hey, thank you so much for all the time, and appreciate it there. And I'm glad Scott Burnworth was able to, during my commute. Like I said, I would have been happy to pull over and do this on a laptop at the side of the road somewhere, but I think it worked out better here. This is a brand new Dunlop truck too. We just got it first race. It's beautiful.
Cool. Have you got Instagram or anything that people can keep up?
Yeah, I'm terrible. I'm not a social media guy. I
blame you.
It's at MX Golden Boy, and so if that's my Instagram, and I do have a Facebook page, but I don't. Again, I used to try to do more, but anymore, social media takes all my type quality.
Well, MX legend, the Golden Boy, Broc Glover. Say no more.
All right, thank you guys so much. All right, bye.
I haven't been feeling really that great all day anyhow. I've been really low on energy for some reason. In that moto, I felt really bad out there, and for some reason, I mean, my times are so far off of what I should be turning, and it just, everything wasn't really clicking at all. As a matter of fact, I was making a lot of mistakes, and I had some trouble with my bike. Something happened to the suspension on it. But it's just, you know, a lot of it was just me. I didn't ride real hard, and I didn't feel comfortable out there at all.
Broc, with us now, Broc Glover in winner's circle. Broc, congratulations. It was a very fine ride. As he gets off his helmet here, Broc Glover has just won the United States Grand Prix.
I could watch that.
Oh, that's funny. I had to put glasses on to see that one. Oh, man.
We're still live. We can't get away.
Show. How hot would it have been that day, Broc?
What's that?
The temperature had been that day.
Oh, it was hot. Trust me, I don't know what it was. I think, honestly, the day before I was struggling. If you remember, those were 2-day formats. You know, you practiced and did a lot of qualifying on the day before. And I think I was struggling so much on the day before. My own stupidity and ego wouldn't let me not try to be fastest qualifier. So I was trying to ride too much. And I did. I rode way too much on the Saturday. And by the time I hit the second day and into that second moto, I was definitely put a fork in me and turned me over because I was cooked. I was completely exhausted, and it was humid and hot.
The track now, looking at it now, looks like the worst prepared practice track you could ever go to, with those random puddles there and then rock hard the other side. It just looks so sketchy. The atmosphere.
Dave, you're spot on. That track had potential to be such an unbelievably fantastic track, and they just did such a horrible job of preparing it most of the time. I remember in '82 when Scott Burnworth, who was myself and Rick Johnson were in the 250 support class, it was the same as, it was like a mud race. Honestly, we were covered in mud, and it was hot summer day in California, and the track raced like a mud race. They had drenched it, and the tracks, they were horrible. They could have done they never put a piece of equipment on the darn track, and that was part of the problem. They barely prepared it, but it was the most iconic layout, you know, especially in California and in Southern California, where it was a fantastic layout. Just lack of preparation.
It's not far from where you live, is it?
What's that?
Far from where you live.
Yeah, it wasn't far from where we lived, you know, and I much preferred racing Saddleback Park because it was usually prepared and halfway decent. But yeah, Carlsbad is only probably where I live now. It's only about 15 miles from where we live now, and it was probably only at that time only about 40 miles away.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
I only ever got there would have been about 5 years ago when I went to one of Scott's reunion things, and I just did a very quick look from up on the hillside.
Yeah.
I wish I'd had the chance to go to a race there back in the day. You know, a big regret of mine not making the effort to get over there while it was actually still running.
Yeah, you know, I wish I'd have known that, Dave. I would have walked over there with you. The drop off at the end, where the footage right there at the very end, I just kind of rolled down. That's called Angel's Drop, I think they called it. That was, in the peak of the day, that was a pretty gnarly drop off, actually. but that section of that track is still standing. The rest of it, most of that property turned into an industrial complex and buildings and things. But that finish line's corner, that drop off into the left-hander and where that under the bridge was, that's still there, and the starting line is still there. Yeah, it will never be developed. It's a natural land use, and it won't be developed there. But it was some sort of track, that's for certain. So
Absolutely.
yeah. So.
Well, on that note, we could go on all night, but we have to say goodnight to everybody. And you must be been on a long time.
I don't have anything for another hour, so we're okay. Are you guys into your second coffees and your whatever? It's only 3:30 in the afternoon here in Houston.
All right, I got another question for you, Broc. With the tires, is there such a thing as a factory tire? You know, that's super special and very different from what the punter can buy.
You know, that's a great question. First and foremost, you know, yes, we certainly have development spec tires that we do use, and the reason this is where we develop product. We try new compounds, we try new constructions. We say, hey, does this new apex work in the tire? Does this new bead design work? And this is where we learn. And you have data acquisition on most of these motorcycles. We can get some pretty accurate information because, again, we work with the very best Supercross riders in the world, the very best technicians, or some of the very best technicians. I'm not downplaying anything happens in Motocross GP by any means. They're fantastic also, but we have a lot of good data here that we can draw off of, and using, most of these top guys are all on Dunlop tires, so it helps us a lot. That being said, if some rider thinks he's going to go put on a spec tire and go out there and all of a sudden, this guy can't win the local race, but he's going to come out here and pick up 2 or 3 seconds a lap, I'm sorry to inform him that's not going to be the case. As a matter of fact, a kind of a funny story about that, even at the privateer level, we get guys saying, hey, I need, if I had these tires, I finished in the top 5. And it's like, I'm sorry, that's not really the case. And the reason I know it's not the case is, for instance, when we were at Salt Lake City last year, the riders were staying in Salt Lake City the whole entire time, and they were practicing at some local practice tracks. Well, Jason Anderson decided he was going to go out and go riding. Well, his mechanic didn't have any tires. He just threw on a standard production tire rear on the bike, and, no big deal, Jason Anderson. So halfway through the session, Jason asks him, hey, man, what's this rear tire? I really like this thing a lot. And he's like, what? Like, I thought you were going to get mad at me, like, I didn't put on a special tire for you. And he says, no, I think this thing works really good. I'd like to run one of these this weekend, the last race. So they come to us and they say, listen, Jason likes this tire a lot. Do you have some of these on the truck? Of course we do. It's a 120/90 size. It's the new little bit larger rear tire. And, it has a 7 or 8 millimeter longer footprint, and it's about 2 millimeters wider, and it seems like when the tracks get real hard packed, the 120/90s rise to the top in the front of the race pack because it seems to make a little more traction. So it's more the size than it is the special tire. So Jason decides he's going to race Salt Lake City the last round on a complete production tire, which is fine with us. We think that was great. So the guy goes out there, and if his seat would have not fallen off with a couple laps to go, he was going to win the main event, no question about it. At first, I think it shocked him that his seat fell off. So he slowed down a little bit. Zach Osborne passed him, and then he realized, hey, I only have a few more laps left. I'm going to gut it out and just go as hard as I can without a seat on my motorcycle. And he did. He finished second place. And for us at Dunlop, we would have been, oh, man, I wish he would have won, to be honest with you. I love the fact that Zach won his first Supercross ever. But it would have been a really cool story if Jason would have won on his just a tire right off the production tire, because, these guys do tend to believe a little bit that sometimes these are the magic bullet. And in most track conditions, a lot of times they're not. But that all being said, these guys also run suspension settings and things like that. If you ever ride their bikes, I've ridden one of them. I was like, oh my God, this is the most uncomfortable motorcycle I've ever ridden. I hated it because I didn't go through 3-foot high whoop-de-doos and do what these guys do. And I wasn't scrubbing the jumps as hard as they were and hitting things as hard as they were with these rock hard suspension. So they tend to have to like a harder tire, a compound or a construction of the tire that's a little firmer so that the carcass doesn't flex too much before it moves their super stiff suspension. because if they had the super stiff suspension on a softer tire, it would bottom against the rim. So what they have out here in suspension settings and tires and different things, it really isn't practical for the average person. And they would, if we produced that carcass, that stiffness of the tire, they wouldn't even like the tire. The public wouldn't like it. So that's a long answer to your question, but yeah.
I guess the whole paddock there is not on Dunlop tires.
You know, the main event, not the entire paddock, no question about it. There were times we would have, but we did have in the 450 main on last Tuesday, and here in the most recent 450 main, 20 of the 22 riders were on Dunlops.
Yeah, I don't know what you think about the like what I call it, the COVID format. I really like it, having a Saturday race and then one on a was it Tuesday night or Wednesday night?
Tuesday, yeah.
I think it's brilliant. It just keeps the energy of it going. I don't know what the riders.
And you know what, Dave? The riders, when the Salt Lake City Supercross, the 7 of them that they did in that 3 and a half week window last time, when it was first announced, there were people like, oh, I don't know about this. By the time they all got done, they thought it was the greatest thing ever. I mean, the riders loved it. Salt Lake City is a beautiful city, mountains right outside. These guys were mountain biking. They were out doing all these different activities. They had places to go ride. They really, really enjoyed it. And I really think that the riders, they are kind of liking these. You know, they get comfortable in a town. You're here once. You're less exposure to the COVID-19. You're in one hotel room or one Airbnb or whatever you are. You don't have to have as many airplane flights, and they get 2 or 3 races done in one spot, and then they go on to the next town. And we do the next stop again the same way in Indianapolis for 3. And then we do a little different in Orlando where we do a Saturday. There is no Tuesday in Orlando. And then go on to Daytona and then back up to Arlington and Dallas, Texas area. So I actually do enjoy it. I think it's fun. It's a more concentrated, form of adding races in a smaller window of time.
Yeah, I'm guessing, when this COVID is all done, perhaps it wouldn't work for the paying spectator. He wouldn't maybe want to go on a Saturday and then afford to go on a Wednesday. But I think for TV, I think it's a good format, and I'd be very surprised if some form of this didn't follow through when we get through all this COVID.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's the first time they've ever raced on a Tuesday, which, Supercross, they never had a Tuesday before, which is.
Is it live on the TV with you?
Yeah, the TV, I mean, they basically, I actually went back, they covered it live, and then I was able to finish up my duties here, and then I went back to the hotel room, had dinner. I did ordered a dinner to go or whatever, picked it up, and went and watched the races again on TV because they had a second airing after the live airing. So it's fantastic because, again, you're on NBC Sports and you're able to watch it, just a few hours after the show. And again, Tuesday night, you're not having to compete with a lot of other sporting events and the audience.
And the riders, are they reasonably good on it, are they?
The riders, are they recently what? Sometimes your audience.
Do they like the format?
Yeah, I haven't heard any complaints from them. It's a little bit disconnected, unfortunately, because you're not allowed to go hang out with the riders and talk to them too much. But the riders I've spoken with, they have not. They like it. It's not a problem. It does make it obviously a little harder if you suffer an injury or something. So we're a little early in the season to find out if somebody's gets a nagging injury. You only have a few days to recover before your next race. But I do know there's a local track here north of Houston that I know that Cooper Webb and Eli Tomac and some of the other riders were out there riding on the day before the race. So it was they were out there riding on Monday, so getting a little lap seat time in.
I didn't get to the question, actually, what I was going to ask you as well, Broc, as you're still there. When you were riding in '89 in the GPs, where was the UK GP? Was it at Fox Hills? You know
what? They didn't even have one in '89. Disappointing. Yeah, the 250s didn't have one. And it was kind of I really didn't get a chance to race too many times in the motocross, and yet there's so many just iconic Grand Prix tracks from Stone Park to Farley Castle, and the ones that I've all read about and heard about and looked at pictures. And it was so fun for me to go to Farley Castle and actually see the track and then be able to see old pictures. And I'm able to go, oh yeah, that looks like Farley. And then sure enough, it says, the UK, Grand Prix in Great Britain and Farley Castle or something. But
you did come to England. Sorry, you did come to England in '89 because I think you came and did the stadium race up in Birmingham.
Yes, and I did a supermoto or super bikers race. I think one time, I don't remember exactly where it was, near the coast, near the English Channel sometime. I think I came over one time and did a race over there too. And unfortunately I didn't get a chance to race that often in the UK. I wish I'd have been over there a little bit more.
Adam, you're going to have to cut me out, mate. I've got to take the dog out for a wee now.
Yeah, cool.
Oh, that's your Dave. That's your excuse because you have to. You get
Cheers,
older,
Dave.
You got to go to the bathroom a little more.
An hour late as it is.
Yeah.
Cheers, Dave.
Don't hold your legs. Don't hold your legs still very long. That dog will use your legs.
Hey, cheerio, bot, and I'll say thanks to you, Adam, for putting it all together.
No, cheers.
Yeah.
All right. Bye.
All the best, Dave. Cheers.
All right, Dave. Take care.
Cheers, Broc.
All right.
So, what's a day in the life of Broc Glover then? These days, Broc, how does your day pan out, as it were?
Well, I'm very fortunate enough to be a home office based person. I was that way before the COVID, so it's really kind of for me, it's always been based out of San Diego. I mean, I obviously travel a lot for my job. I mean, I go to probably 35 or 40 races a year, depending on, the pro races alone. We have close to 30 top level pro races. And then we have, amateur races and off-road races that I attend to. And so that takes about 40 weeks out of the year right there. So that's quite a bit. Family man, been married, to my wife for 25 years or so. And, it's actually 27, but it's we have 2 children. We have a 21-year-old, almost 22-year-old daughter, and we have a 19-year-old son, Dane. And so JC and Dane are both in college, and they're both doing online college right now. So they're both at home, which is great for us because we love having them.
So did you have children when you were racing?
No, that gets brought up a lot, actually. I don't personally, my personality type or just what kind of effort I seem to spend in the motocross, I don't know that it would have been a very good parent. I wouldn't have had much time, and so I'm kind of glad that we waited until after I was retired.
No, because obviously I always think when you haven't got, as soon as you have children, as soon as I had children, my mentality changed of like the risks you would have taken when you would have been racing.
I couldn't agree more. And also just the time, it's a very, it's a time, the time it takes to become a good motocross and a champion level motocross supercross rider, you don't have a lot of time for other things. And you really don't have time what children need a lot of time, and they deserve your time. And if you don't have your time to give to them, that's always a difficult thing. And I'm very happy the fact that I was retired racing full time before we had children.
Did you go to Australia and ride?
I did many times, actually.
Yeah.
And I raced a lot more down there than I mentioned in the UK, but I thoroughly enjoy Australia a lot. I feel like Australia, to me, reminds me a lot of what California was when I was growing up as a kid, when there was a lot less people, a lot more open areas, and I truly agree.
Yeah, because the reason I asked, we were talking about kids and family. I was speaking to Jeff Leese the other day, and he's such a top guy and an open, honest guy. And sadly, his father passed away. And he said, when I'd done the eulogy, he said, all is what I could talk about was racing, because he said that's all that was our total life, didn't do anything else. He said that's all he'd done. It was just, he was so driven, because I think Jeff's dad was a speedway rider, like on bikes and in cars, and obviously Jeff raced.
Well, Jeff Leask was my neighbor when I lived in Belgium in 1989, and I had a tremendous, good friendship with Jeff. And later, as you mentioned, his father was promoting a supercross race in Perth. And those of you who are not familiar with Australia, it's a gigantic country. It's Perth is the very farthest west coast, like you'd think of California in the United States. And the rest of the population in Australia is on the furthest east coast. So you have a lot of distance between those two. But Jeff was from Perth on the west coast, and his father promoted a supercross race. And I was the lone American that Jeff invited down, and his father invited down. So I was able to fly all the way down there and race his father's promoted race and race with Jeff. And I thoroughly enjoyed his father, and I thoroughly enjoy Jeff still to this day. And I'm sorry to hear about his dad passing. I didn't know that.
Yeah, because I was saying to Dave earlier, I rang him, and it was 5:30 in the morning there. And I didn't realise, and he still answered the phone, and he was just like, "Oh, no problem." And then we just started going into this chat, and that was one of the stories he said to me.
That's funny when you talk about the time. I had this one dear friend when I lived in Europe. He would always call me at 3 or 4 in the morning, and he'd always be mixed up at what time it was. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you need to he'd call me when he'd get into his office, and he'd wake me up in the middle of the morning, and I'm like, oh my goodness, you got to stop doing this. And he was stationed in Germany when he was in the military. I'm like, if anybody that should know, time changes, just add 9 hours. That's what time it is. It's very funny.
And what was funny is he said to me, I'm dealing with somebody on somewhere else in Australia, but there's a 3-hour time difference. And you just, like you say, you forget how vast the country is.
Yeah, it's huge. I can't imagine driving from Perth all the way over to the East Coast and race some of the Gold Coast and some of that area over near Sydney. I mean, there's nothing out there in the middle of that outback where they talk about it. There's miles and miles and miles of nothing, and I can't imagine driving that thing for 2 or 3 days in an old big truck and trying to get to one side.
What were the sort of distances you used to travel for the race meetings?
We mentioned that earlier, that I didn't race a whole lot. My very first pro year, I drove just quite a few races, maybe 4 or 5 of the races, when I was a privateer with my father. But from there, I picked up a factory ride. Actually, I signed my contract mid-season. I signed it at the end of the Nationals in September. I signed with Yamaha. So at that point, I was on an airplane. So I didn't have to do a whole lot of seat time in a car, but I still do drive a lot, though. Don't get me wrong. I still drive a lot, like during the summer.
With the factory contract, did they look after you well? Was it like first class travel, or was it like just normal travel?
No. Traveling today is so much easier than it ever used to be. Honestly, people are like, oh, you hate traveling. No, it's a piece of cake right now. When you have a smartphone and you got apps and you can make reservations and change your seats and you can I started off, and you had literally airplane tickets they printed, and you had these carbon copies, and if you lost the airplane ticket, you were out of luck, and you always had to make sure you knew where your airplane ticket was, and when you got to rent a car, you had to stand in line. In a hotel, you had to stand in line. Nowadays, everything's just done on your mobile app, and you don't even ordering food. And traveling is 100 times easier today than it was then. But we did not sit first class. We sat coach, and we'd be lucky to not be in the smoking section in a middle seat. So it's not the same. There wasn't no loyalty points and loyalty programs back then. So,
who was your main rival, would you say, or your fiercest competitor? Because I always think somebody that gets left behind from America, not left behind is the wrong way, but it's like Mark Barnett was such a great rider.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. You knew I was coming out of my mouth in 2 seconds. The baddest dude on a motorcycle, the most underrated motocross rider in American history in the last 50 years, it's got to be Mark Barnett. He was such an unbelievably good rider, and he was such a competitor, and he was trained like crazy, and he was as strong could be. And there was some great footage of Mark in that Motocross and Trophy to Nations there that you were showing some of Mark racing in there. And ironically enough, Houston Supercross was my very first AMA Supercross win. And I always thought to myself, and I also won my first AMA National Motocross race here in Houston. And I was like, man, Houston's been good to me. You know, I was kind of proud of myself. And I was like, yeah, I won. Gosh, I seem like I did good. Like, I don't remember all the results, but I had, you know, I thought I did good, like in the early 80s, 80, 81, 82. When we used to race the double headers, and they were 2-night events, back-to-back, 2 nights in a row, and they were always these double header races. So that window of 80, 81, 82, 83, that were 4 years, 8 races. And I was looking back going, I know I did good. I know I did good there. And I looked at the results. And I realized that I had finished on the podium 7 of the 8 times. I had a first, 3 seconds, and 3 thirds. And that's not too bad, you know. And I had that one other race, an outlier. I think I had a crash and I finished 7th or 9th or something, not good. And I thought, man, I was pretty proud of myself. And I was like, I wonder who won those other times that I didn't win. And I looked in just a 3-year window. Let's get rid of 1980. Let's just look at 81, 82, 83. Those 3 years, there were 6 Supercrosses in Houston. Mark Barnett won 5. And the other race, he had a crash, he said, too, and he finished like 8th or 9th or whatever. So he won 5 times in 6 tries. And I called him up. I said, man, I was feeling good about myself until I just said, you owned Houston. He started laughing. He said, I did. And I sent him, because somebody sent me a picture of the 2 of us standing on the starting line. And I said, he goes, that was from Houston. And I just started laughing. I said, you own this place, buddy. He goes, yeah, it was always good to me. And we laughed, and we always, you know, there's a couple of guys we think were maybe a little overrated, but people do not realize how good he was during that, like really from 1980, 79, 80, all the way through about 82 or 3. Like, he had a really strong run in there.
You're still there. You just stopped for a sec. That's all right.
Oh, sorry about that. I was saying that Mark Barnett had a really strong run really from 1980 all the way through to about 83. And then he had some injuries that really sidelined his career, but he's clearly, in my opinion, one of the toughest competitors, and he was the most underrated of particularly the AMA motocross riders.
Because I'm a bit younger than you, Broc, so like I was like, when you were around, I'm like 12, 13, 14 years old. And the only thing I could get, I started right race when I was 6. You know, went through schoolboys, injuries, whatever. But the only way I could get the American stuff was the motocross magazines.
Yeah.
So obviously the people that always stick in your mind is the guy that's on the front page all the time, you know?
Yeah.
Like yourself, Ricky Johnson.
Yeah. Yes. Were you? What bikes did you ride? Did you ride Suzuki's or something? Were you?
I started on an XR75 4-stroker.
I had one of those too, but I bought that later. That was my pit bike. I love those little bikes. Yep.
Yeah. Then I always rode Honda. I don't know why. And then I rode a Kawasaki. And then Dave's meeting came up. I stopped riding when I was like 16. I broke my leg twice when I was 13 and just thought, I was on crutches for 6 months and thought, this is before they pin legs and stuff.
Yeah.
So I was off for a couple of years, came back, and you just forget how quick everybody else had progressed. I was quite a quick schoolboy rider. I was all right. And then I came back to race, and of course, everybody just progressed so much more. And I
had that a couple of times in my career too. You know, I had a broken navicular in 1985, leading the Supercross series, leading the outdoor championship in the 500s, and then broke a navicular that wouldn't heal properly. First of all, I didn't know it was broken, so I raced a couple more races on it, wrapped up the 500 championship, and then realized, I got a broken bone in my wrist. So then the same thing happened when I tried to come back from that. You know, you're out 3 or 4 months, and then I rode again, and it re-broke, and so that was out another 3 or 4 months, and so seemed like a whole year went by before I was really trying to get back to competitive, and the whole world had passed me by. I mean, it was a lot of work to get back up to that top rate and that top speed.
Yeah, so I like don't really I should be talking about yourself, but as I rode, I like 16, I sort of retired or stopped riding, and then Dave started that meeting in 2009, My cousin had one of these stuck in his garage.
Let's see. Oh, there you go, buddy. A full floater. There you go.
That's it. It was a little bit special because it was called an RM 500 special. Basically, Heron Suzuki redone the barrel, so it was a centre port to fit in a 250 frame. So it's sort of a semi-works bike sort of thing, and it sat in his garage for 23 years. Got it out. I went to ride it, done one lap, pulled over, took my helmet off, and couldn't breathe. Then realised how fit you got to be. And then
it's funny when you were talking about that. The one thing that it was, I started something that was September, I guess it was. Well, part of the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. The number 65 is a number that means, and the reason that was because when the foundation started and the mothers were trying to cold call people on the telephone to say, they were ringing them up on the telly, as you'd say, and they were trying to say, hey, we're trying to raise money for a thing called the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, blah, blah, blah. So this mother was doing this when their child that had cystic fibrosis was there, and he couldn't figure out what she was saying. And so she says, I know what you're doing. And the mom asked what? He said, you're trying to buy 65 roses. So the little kid couldn't say cystic fibrosis. He thought he was saying 65 roses. So that was they ended up copywriting and trademarking the 65 roses story. And that's a number that they use in the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation still to this day for a lot of activities. And so during this COVID, they had people raising money and doing activities for 65 straight days. You could pick anything you wanted to do. It doesn't even matter. And many people picked a form of exercise. So I decided I was going to run for 65 straight days. And I didn't care if it was, but I had a minimum I wanted to run with. To me, it was like 2 kilometers or 1.6 miles. That was the minimum I was going to say, okay, I'm going to, because some days I would be up at 4 o'clock in the morning because I was at Loretta Lynn's in a thunderstorm just getting ready to go to the motocross race. And I was up at 4:30 in the morning out running in a thunderstorm to get my mile in that day. So I didn't care rain or shine. It mattered not. I was absolutely going to run for 65 days. So I started into it. I got all the way through the 65 and I'm like, shoot, being the competitive knucklehead I wasn't going to stop. So I said, I'm going to do 100 straight days. So I kept it all the way up to 100. Well, luckily for me, Scott Burnworth's, that Southern California Classic, the SoCal Vintage Motocross Classic, was right around day 80. And when I raced that race, I was shocked. I raced, I think, at least 6 motos and the practice sessions, and I was completely unfazed. Like, I honestly could have rode 5 more motos and not even bothered me. And that's what you're talking about. That's the one thing to me when I rode motocross, you don't realize how such a cardiovascular activity it is until you stop doing cardiovascular work and then try to jump on a dirt bike and you come off in 2 laps hyperventilating.
Yeah, that's literally what happened. My brother-in-law that came with me thought I'd crash my brains out. He said, "What happened?" I said, "I couldn't breathe." It's just like it's a relaxation thing as well, isn't it? It's like when you first start riding again, you get arm pump and you're tense and bloody. But it's one of those sports that I try and explain to my wife, because I met my wife after I stopped racing, etc. And it's just a thing that's in your blood. I can't even though I stepped away from it, it's still somewhere churning away inside even now.
As long as you're realistic and you realize, no, I can't make another comeback. No. No, it is in your blood, and you know what? If you do it and you're reasonable, you got to be careful when you get a little older. Obviously, you don't heal as fast and all the things. And the new modern bikes go so darn fast. You're actually hitting the ground. You're hitting the ground faster than you used to because you're physically going faster. So you got to be careful. But the flip side is there's nothing like riding motocross, nothing like riding dirt bikes and having fun. And that's why here I am. I realize I've been around this sport for over 50 years. I've been going to motocross races, and I've seen a heck of a lot in my day. And it's been fun.
I bet when you went to Scott Burnworth's vintage motocross weekend, when you get on the line, it's sort of hard to explain to people. You still want to be I still want to get to that first turn first.
That's probably a downfall for me. I don't know if it's what I expect out of myself or what people probably expect from me or whatever it is, but I don't like that picture. You showed that footage from the Fight Club, and to me, when I see that footage, it frustrates me because I didn't have a chance. I didn't have a motorcycle. I didn't have a chance to really practice before it, and I just showed up back there, and I got there, and it was 30 degrees outside, so I couldn't practice one day, and I got there a couple days early thinking I was going to get to ride, and I never got to ride until the day of the event. And you just, when your brain's telling you, I want to go like this, I want to ride harder, I want to do this, but you can't. And it's a frustrating thing, especially when you've kind of in your life, you've reached a pretty high level of the sport, and then to not be able to ride like you want to ride. I guess I don't know if you're into bowling or something and you used to bowl 300 games and you used to bowl, your average was 260 pins or whatever, and then you take 10 years off of it and all of a sudden you're bowling 130, you're like, wait a minute, I used to be good at this. This is and if I went bowling, I'd be happy if I've got a 130 bowling, but somebody who used to throw 300 perfect games is not happy with a 130.
So where are you actually at the moment then, Broc?
I'm sitting in a brand new Dunlop. Let me see here if I can get you some photos of our new truck here. This is our new semi right there, the brand new lockers for our crew. And all right behind me, you got to have, let's see, there's a 50-inch new flat screen TV behind me.
Yeah.
The new couch and the fold out. Yeah, this is the inside of our new semi right here. So it's very nice, and I can even mess with you here. I can open up the door here. Let's see. Look out.
Yeah, go for it.
Here you can see. Whoops, sorry about this. I don't know if we can see down the hallway here. Turn on some lights.
All the tires.
Yeah, maybe we can turn on a few more lights here. Yeah, there we go. Got your lights there. Can you see down the hallway? Yeah. Millions of more.
How many tires does it hold?
Oh, I know. And there's upstairs. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can. When it's real crazy here, we can do 1,200 tires on board. If that's about 1,100 really. About 1,100, and you can't. 1,100 and you can't walk. And so we don't like to haul that many, but anything over like 600, 700, 800 tires is kind of a typical load for it.
What amazes me with tires is it's the thing between you and the ground. Yet people always seem to want budget. It's like I can't. The mentality of it, like a friend of mine's actually had a tire business, done everything, motorbike tires, carts, selling them, to the public. But he said people come into his shop and say, I want the cheapest budget tire you can give me. He said, it's the most important thing in a vehicle, he says.
You're just I don't know, kind of scratching or peeling back the scab on that wound or somewhere, I guess, or just kind of activating a point of mind. The dumbest thing you can do as a motocross rider is to spend trying to buy some cheap, terrible knockoff tire. I mean, the top tire companies get there for a reason because they make the best product. It's the only thing on your motorcycle that touches the ground. It's the only thing that moves the ground or motorcycle, the only thing that moves the bike. It's your only connection to the earth. And you're going to save $5 or 5 pounds on a tire and risk having a terrible result in a race if you're racing, risk falling down, crashing, breaking a bone. How much does it cost to go to the hospital and get a cast on your arm or your leg or whatever? And in vintage motocross, if you're a vintage motocross rider, the single best thing you can do to your bike, period, is put a 2021 tire, a tire that has the technology of all the modern, specifications, patterns, and everything that we've ever learned how to develop a better motocross tire. You can put that on a 1980s and 1970s motorcycle and improve more with the tire than you can with all the stuff, suspension work and all the other things that you're doing. Yet people will put some of the craziest Chinese knockoff fake branded tires on their vintage bikes, and I don't understand it. It's like it's penny wise and pound foolish.
Yeah, when you look at the tires of yesteryear, on the bikes, the shape of them, and the technology's just moved on so much.
It has incredibly so. I mean, there were periods where you're making tires with like rubbers in the sidewalls that are kind of anti-bounce, and they're like a dampening in the tire. It's an important part of your suspension component, really. And it's very critical how the tire works in conjunction with the suspension in the whole motorcycle. So, people out there, honestly, that's not where you don't save money on tires. You should buy your best tire you can, and especially if you're a vintage bike rider, but modern bike too, obviously, but vintage bike in particular, that's the biggest place you can pick up an advantage.
We'll give them a bit of what you do, because I didn't have a chance to play this earlier.
Well, Broc Glover, Dunlop's senior manager of off-road, and we're here at the MX33 launch at Zaca Station, and beautiful day, and what a great day to introduce a new product. One of the things with the new MX33 that we were after was to have the legendary performance of the 3S and increase the performance in even harder pack conditions. And we accomplished that by introducing the progressive cornering block technology, so the knob within the knob on the side knobs, and also to increase performance and also to increase durability. So the combination of a new compound, a new knob within the knob technology on the sidewalls, and then also the introduction of the tie bar between the two side shoulder knobs there has allowed us to get the performance we wanted and increase the durability. So we're really excited about the MX33. Dunlop has that luxury of working with pretty much every top manufacturer and rider in Supercross at the pro level. We also have just a wonderful group of amateur riders that we get to draw off of too, with our Team Dunlop Elite riders, plus our relationships with the OEs has helped a lot there too. So we've been developing this tire for well over a year now, and it's been winning races at the AMA Pro level for over a year. So it's been well tested, a lot of test hours and laps on these tires, and again, it's just we feel like we've got a great product.
Do you have to give the tires to the team, or do they have to buy them, Broc?
At the top level, the teams do have allotments. I mean, one of the things many years ago, there were some of the tire companies came in and they started paying the teams and things, which was kind of it became, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing to start paying the tires to use, the teams to use your product, but we don't pay any teams. We just provide them product and technical support, and when we need in testing, if they request testing with us. So no, we don't charge up to a certain allotment. Once they go over their allotment, they have to purchase from there.
Because I'm into music. I do a bit of music on the side, and I've sort of got to know some really sort of top world-class musicians, and they're endorsed by Yamaha drums or somebody. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, oh, that's great, free drum kits. And he's like, oh, no. He said, we still have to buy them. We just,
Yeah.
But it's weird.
You don't have a sponsorship I mean, some of the guys have to have sponsorships, like with guitars and drum. No, they must get some, huh?
Yeah, they get endorsed by, say, Gibson guitar, but they still have to sort of pay for the guitar, although it's most probably discounted price, but they still have to pay for it, which I sort of found quite interesting. So that's why I asked the question whether, like, a lot of them.
I'll bet when they start buying their guitars, that's when they stop standing on stage, huh?
Yeah.
Hey, maybe we should start. I think that's a good idea. We should start charging for tires out here more often, and they could do burnouts. And no, trust me. There's been more than one mechanic, though, we've had to talk about. They come over and request a new front tire, and it's like, boy, that one doesn't look too bad. And they put a new front tire on, and then you see them over here bedding the brakes in the asphalt parking lot, wearing the knobby tire down. It's like, hey, wait a minute, man. We saw you riding back and forth, bedding the front brake in really hard, aggressively, obviously wearing the tire out, and then now you want a new tire. It's like, come on, man. You gotta do a little harder than that. Try a little harder than that. So. Yeah. Let's see. What instruments do you play?
I sing, Broc. I can play the guitar a bit, and I've got like a.
Come on, show your talent. We're here. What are you gonna sing? Come on.
Oh God, no. I'll send you something.
Please do. I'm interested in seeing it. Yeah.
I'm quite a shy. I've done quite a lot of fun, bit like yourself. My daughter had open heart surgery when she was like 16 months old. She's fine now. She's like 20 years old, but has to. So with stuff like that, I've done quite a lot for charity and charity gigs and spinal. A good friend of mine broke his neck doing the sport we love, but still, he was watching tonight. I don't know if he still is, but he's a real nice.
Shout out to him. What's his name? Give him a shout out.
David Sterland, his name is.
All right. Nice. I hope David's watching. So yeah.
Yeah, he's a real top guy. He's 55 now, lives life to the full. Been in the chair for 35 years. So we've done quite a lot of fundraising for spinal research, putting on music events and stuff. I'm quite a nerve. I get quite like talking to yourself. I can still get nervous. It's just weird.
Man.
I hope the interview's been okay and you've enjoyed it.
Yeah. Well, I will. Next time, UK, we'll sit down and have beer together, and then we can. You won't be nervous. Go to the beer tent. We'll go to the beer tent at the Farley Castle, right? Isn't that?
Oh God, yeah.
Bee stings, right? The bee stings.
Oh God, yeah. You keep away from that stuff.
Yeah,
it's
that
dangerous.
was. I had a good time with all that. That was a lot of fun. That tent there, Dave has at that meeting.
What year was it you came over? Was it about 5 years ago?
Come on, Adam. I can't even remember what I had.
Can't remember.
I remember what I had for breakfast, let alone what year I came over there. But yeah, I was over there twice, I think, right? It was very, very fun. And I don't remember. It was about 5-6 years ago, though.
Yeah. No, it's a great event. It's just got bigger and bigger. I just hope it happens this year. But I've got to say, with COVID, the way things are going, it's getting worse here in the UK. So who knows? I just try not to watch the news anymore because it's just like same old.
I'm with you. It's difficult, and just when you think it's like, oh, they're overreacting, and I mean, I know the numbers that they're claiming with the deaths and things, I know they're elevated because I know firsthand of cases where these were clearly not COVID deaths and they contributed to COVID. But on the very flip side of that, I am not somebody who's downplaying the seriousness of this, because I also know some people that have had very brief encounters with people that tested positive, and literally 24-year-old last week, passes away. And it's like 24-year-olds should not be passing away from COVID because they had a 5 or 10 minute brief encounter with somebody that came to do some repair work at their house. And so I don't want to be that 1% or 0.5%. I don't know. I don't know which unlucky or lucky straw that I would draw. So I don't want to risk it. But I will say this, that our son, before this whole pandemic was really publicized, he had a cold and he didn't feel very well for a couple of days, and he thought he was okay after about 3 days, and then he started feeling really bad again, and then the 4th and 5th day he was basically at home with what he thought was a bad cold and a low-grade fever and a sore throat. And so he was tested here 2 or 3 months after that with the blood test, and they just decided, well, we're testing many other things for cystic fibrosis, but in the meantime, we might as well check the box or two on a COVID test just to see. And 45 minutes later, the doctor walked in and said, congratulations, you survived it. You're our first person in San Diego County that with cystic fibrosis that has had a positive COVID, and you have the antibodies, so you clearly had COVID. And luckily for us, nobody in our family caught it from him, and we're not sure how, but this was kind of almost in the beginning of the COVID lockdown, and when we really didn't know much about it. So this would have been the first week in March, but here in the U.S.
I know I'm one of these guys. I like to live life to the full and happy-go-lucky. You only come around this way once, sort of attitude. And when it all sort of came about, you all think, we should just still keep living life. But I think a lot of people have changed their minds now that thought that way.
Yeah, it's really hard when we're in our position that we're in right now. I mean, this is the only time I've had a mask off, and I'm isolated in an office. And before I did this, I literally took a Lysol disinfectant spray and sprayed the entire office. And it's, yeah, it's very hard being on the road. I luckily found a hotel that had only been open 5 days, and they put me in a room that they had said nobody had occupied. So I've been here the whole time in the same hotel room, but nobody else had ever occupied in a brand new hotel. And so it's hard being on the road because you're in rental cars. You have to, if you risk, in Texas you can go dine in, but they separate. You know, there's social separation, but I'm not even that comfortable with that. I'm just ordering with an app and take out food, and it's hard to live like this. I feel sorry for the kids right now. It's crazy. Some of these, you know, we've got to get this vaccination rolled out and get going.
Talking back earlier when we were talking about music and stuff, I just realised I've got a little video on here I can pop up.
Not of me.
No, of me. Do you like guitar?
Sake.
Do you like guitar? I'm not actually singing in it, but do you like guitar?
Okay, so I have to give my friend a shout out here. So you probably, I mean, do you know who Lyle Lovett is? He's a 3-time Grammy Award winner.
No, I don't actually.
No, well, Lyle Lovett, you have to look up some of his music. So Lyle has been a lifelong. I met Lyle at the 1983 Motocross of Nations in Angro, Belgium, that you showed on that video. That's the first time I ever met him. He was playing his early music career, and he was in Luxembourg, and he saw a poster that the Motocross of Nations was in Belgium, and he drove all the way over in Luxembourg to watch it. And Lyle he literally raced motocross here in the Texas area. He swept floors on the garage or in the shop called Cycle Shack, which was kind of a known motocross shop back in the 70s and 80s in Texas, Houston area. And he still rides to this day, good friends with Roger DeCoster. And like I said, he was 3-time Grammy Award winner, and he does acting, still plays musician, and he just did an online concert with Elvis Costello, which I imagine you know who Elvis Costello is.
Yeah, yeah.
So you need to look up Lyle Lovett, and he's just a super guy. But I was at his ranch this morning, and he was taking photos of some horses and doing some other things, and that's where earlier today I was up with him, and so he's just a talented musician.
I've just wrote his name down, so I've got it.
Yeah, you have to do some good research. Yeah,
it's weird. I love all the American music. You know,
yeah.
I like groups. I'm into sort of soul funk stuff, really.
Oh yeah, okay.
Groups
he crosses over. Lyle's is interesting. His genre is kind of crosses. It's sort of country, but it's sort of not. I mean, he does, but he has a group called his Large Band, and they're the group of anytime they're in between maybe 12 to 15 musicians that are most talented, incredibly talented musicians. And many times they play with all other different bands, and they do studio recordings and things. And Lyle always teases that he's like the least talented guy in the band, which is not true. But that show is the most incredible show. And I got to watch him the 4th of July a couple of years ago down in San Diego on the Embarcadero. So the city of San Diego brought him in and have his large band and play, and they were just phenomenal. But yeah, he's a big motocross fan, watches every single race, every single Supercross, motocross, and he still rides and yeah. So that's he was asking me. I tried to take some guitar lessons, and I was pitiful. I have no musical talent whatsoever, and he was asking me if I tried to pick it back up again, and I said no, it's the lost cause.
I think that's what I realised, like whether you're a sportsman, musician, to get to the top and be really good, the dedication it takes, the time is just, of course you need a bit of talent as well, but you need so much dedication to get to the top of anything.
Yeah, but really do. You're talking about musicians. I mean, Josh Hill plays pretty good guitar. He's one of the motocross guys here, and then Aaron Plessinger, he sings pretty well. I went to his little celebration of his dual championships a few years ago, and it was a lot more than just karaoke. He was pretty good too. So there's some guys out here that can pluck a guitar and play a little singing too.
Well, that's what I was going to say. You've obviously heard of Led Zeppelin.
Of course.
Just checking. Hit Jason Bonham. Do you know Jason Bonham?
Of course. Yes.
Well, he used to do schoolboy motocross.
Yeah, I'd heard that. And his father, obviously, John Bonham. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I've got old cuttings of him when he was racing, but whether it's true or not, somebody said to me his dad and basically Led Zeppelin was a bit like Farley Castle. There was a beer tent and they turned up and done a set at a like schoolboy scramble meeting. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. But it surprised me.
Yeah. It's funny. I mean, when Lyle was, we were out in Boise, Racer X sponsors a vintage race in Boise, Idaho every year, and Scott Wallenberg, publisher of Racer X, he works with Davey Coons over there, and they put on an event, and Lyle showed up and raced a couple of times, and I rode a couple of his bikes, and we all hung out together, and Lyle jumped up on stage at our little Saturday night. We called it the Supercross watching party because it goes on at the same time, and we all get together to watch the Supercross, and then Scott plays in a band, and he jumps up on there and talked Lyle in to come up, play 3 or 4 songs. It's pretty good. So yeah, Lyle, I think he has at least 3 Grammys. So if you know what a Grammy is, for goodness.
Yeah, of course.
He has at least 3 Grammys. So he's done something, that's for darn sure.
I'm going to do a plug now. Adam Winslet Band. I'm on Facebook.
All right.
But if you like guitarists, my guitarist is great. And cut a long story short, the guys in my band have played with Van Morrison, Dire Straits, Tina Turner. They're good.
So are you the least talented one in the band too, or come on?
No, I'm just a front man. Okay. Great guitar solo. Bit off motocross, but who cares?
Where are you guys playing there?
That was a believe it or not, that was a jazz festival.
Oh, okay.
We don't do any jazz whatsoever, but jazz festivals, you can almost play anything. That was a place called Marlborough Jazz Festival, the sort of biggest stage.
Wow, that was pretty awesome. That's pretty good. So, well, geez, went from music to world peace to motocross to what else can we?
God, Joe. Well, I better leave you to it. It, Broc. You know, I expect you're busy. God, you know, we've been on.
Actually, our crew's gone home. It's after closing hour, and I've got about 1 hour until I do the Dunlop, the track conditions report. We do a coverage of break down the track of each week's races and discuss what we think with Tyler Ettenap and myself, and we go over the track, and it's what kicks off the Supercross live show every week. So we shoot that on sometimes on zone time. There you go. Welcome to why is this so long?
I think that was because obviously I've got these cans on, and somebody was knocking at my door to buy the sounds of it's just come in, and I can hear she was knocking the door.
They heard a guitar solo. They figured you were jamming this music. So that's right. So, Well, Adam, I thank you very much for your time. I won't keep you any longer. And
no. Thanks for coming. I've loved it, Broc. Thank you so much for talking to a legend like yourself. It's bloody brilliant. Excuse my language. But
thank you so much. Send me a link to the music. I want to catch up and check it out.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to come over to Scott's vintage thing.
Yeah, he has he has multiple events.
Yeah.
But
one in October, I think it is.
Yeah, that's the SoCal Vintage MX Classic. Yeah,
I'd like to come over, and I said I'd do a stint for him.
Absolutely, that's very good. There's lots of bikes. I'm sure let you ride one of their bikes, and I guess if you're coming over, I'll have to start training right now.
God, yeah, I'll just.
All right.
Cheers, man.
Wicked. All right. Thanks.
Cheers.
Okay.
All the best, Scott. Cheers.
All right.
Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
I mean, keeps calling you Scott. Broc.
I know. We were talking about Scott.
Yeah. Cheers, man.
Close me out. See you, man. Bye-bye.
Well, Broc Glover, Dunlop's Senior Manager of Off-Road, and we're here at the MX33 launch at Zatka Station, and beautiful day, and what a great day to introduce a new product. One of the things with the new MX33 that we were after was to have the legendary performance of the 3S and increase the performance in even harder pack conditions. And we accomplished that by introducing the progressive cornering block technology, so the knob within a knob on the side knobs, and also to increase performance and also to increase durability. So the combination of a new compound, a new knob within the knob technology on the sidewalls, and then also the introduction of the tie bar between the two side shoulder knobs there has allowed us to get the performance we wanted and increase the durability. So we're really excited about the MX33. You know, Dunlop has that luxury of working with pretty much every top manufacturer and rider in Supercross at the pro level. We also have just a wonderful group of amateur riders that we get to draw off of too with our Team Dunlop Elite riders, plus our relationships with the OEs has helped a lot there too. So we've been developing this tire for well over a year now, and it's been winning races at the AMA Pro level for over a year. So it's been, you know, it's been well tested, a lot of test hours and laps on these tires, and again, it's just we feel like we've got a great product.